meeting or any of the meetings, so they've asked that they could see this as a recording afterwards. So if that affects whether you want to participate or not, then sorry about that, but it's useful for us to record it for future reference. So thank you.
So it should be recording now.
Great, fantastic, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Great, so to introduce myself, I'm Emily Reid. I work for Devon County Council as a resource for the Devon Climate Emergency Partnership, which I'll explain a bit more about as some context as to why I'm involved in this workshop and why I'm really keen to see you discuss electrifying boating in Devon. So Devon Climate Emergency Partnership is aiming to create a resilient net zero carbon Devon where people and nature can thrive. So this is off the back of the IPCC, so the International Panel on Climate Change, advising that, that carbon dioxide emissions need to be reduced globally by at least 45% by 2030 from 2010 levels, and to net zero, so that the sinks, for example, trees that draw down emissions and the sources of emissions are balanced to zero by 2050. At the latest, if we're to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. I'm not going to go into much detail as to climate change because I assume that many of you are here because you've got an interest in it. But for Devon, it means that we're likely to have warmer, wetter winters and drier, hotter summers on the whole, with more risk of things like flooding and so on. So the aims of the Devon Climate Emergency Partnership is to coordinate a collaborative Devon-wide response to the climate emergency and ecological crisis, as I said, to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050 at the latest, and to improve nature's ability in Devon to absorb emissions, and the resilience of Devon's environment against those worst effects of climate change. And that's in part about helping communities to make the adaptations to infrastructure and services to respond to the warmer world. We have several working groups, the response group and tactical group are strategy groups, as I'll outline. And then we're looking at the mitigation side of things, so emissions reductions, and that's led by the Net Zero Task Force, which will produce a Devon carbon plan saying how we will reduce emissions. And then the adaptation stream of work that's led by the Climate Impacts Group, that actually is in coordination with Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly to say how we will adapt to those risks and impacts of climate change. So it's a cross-organisational partnership, lots of district councils, as well as key organisations such as South West Water, the universities, Devon Wildlife Trust. So it's a good breadth of organisations, and also the West Country Rivers Trust as well, so pertinent to this conversation. The tactical group is essentially a group of staff provided from the partnership organisations to help deliver the project, and Devon County Council has provided some funding for this process, including for my post and the communications intern who is also on this conference. So there was a declaration developed by the partnership and that outlined some principles, mainly that we need to ask national government for the changes that we need to reduce our emissions and look at our own organisational emissions. And most of the district councils and other local authorities and national parks in Devon have signed up to that, and there's a full list online. So as I said, the Net Zero Task Force is leading on the emissions reduction. It's made up of 14 independent specialists who are volunteers, chaired by Patrick Devine-Wright, who's at the University of Exeter, but is also one of the lead authors of the IPCC report, so very well placed to lead this work. It's got a lot of expertise, from transport engineers to waste specialists and soil scientists, much more expertise as well. And it's developing the Devon Carbon Plan, which will outline how we get to net zero.
Emily, before
yeah.
you, is it possible to share your presentation on the full screen, because we're getting
is it a bit small? Okay.
We've got the.
Have you got the notes, the presentation view?
Yeah, yeah, we haven't got the normal full screen.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yes, that is perfect.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know. This is the process that we've been through, or that we were planning to go through to develop the Devon Carbon Plan. We were hoping to have a citizens' assembly this summer, but obviously we haven't been able to do that due to coronavirus outbreak. So instead, we're going to have to publish a interim report which outlines the things that we think are publicly acceptable, but outlines the things that we think require more public consultation, those contentious issues that need deliberation by the citizens' assembly. And so we will refrain from outlining the detail of actions to take on those until in 2021, when we've been able to hold the Citizens' Assembly, when we'll then update the carbon plan to reflect that. So we had an evidence gathering phase, which there was a public call for evidence when anyone could submit their ideas and contributions online, as well as a series of thematic hearings around different themes from food, land and sea, etc. Which were sort of round table meetings on how we ought to get to net zero Devon. This is an example of what the thematic hearings look like. We also held a youth parliament with around 75 students participating, and as I said, we're planning a citizens' assembly of around 100 people approximately, deliberating the more contentious issues. And the plan will go out for public consultation. Actually, it's looking more like December now that we'll get that out, due to delays related to partners' involvement in the COVID response. Here's the youth parliament taking place. So we're working towards the interim Devon Carbon Plan at the moment, refining the actions. We've got approximately 160 that we've identified from the evidence gathered so far, and trying to work out who has the ability to implement those actions in Devon at the moment, and what the impact might be. The Climate Impacts Group is led by the Environment Agency, and as I said, works with Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. And the Met Office has provided the baseline projections for the region. And we're using the structure of the Community Risk Register as a basis for looking at risks. So we're currently doing a risk analysis across the natural environment, health, and flood and coastal risk, with the different members of the group leading on that, so the Local Nature Partnership, Environment Agency, Public Health England and the University of Exeter. So just to give you a feel of the emissions breakdown, the most significant contributors to Devon's emissions are the built environment, transport and agriculture. Basically, there's not very much data on boats and marine emissions. We estimate that fishing vessels amount to about 1.2% of transport emissions and 0.3% of the total emissions, but we haven't included it in the pie chart because the data is not very good. And we estimate that whilst recreational boats are probably much higher in number than fishing vessels, the usage hours is actually probably quite low, and there are no there aren't very good records for what that might be for Devon, so we haven't actually included that explicitly in our baseline figures. Probably the principles of the plan that are most pertinent to this discussion are the principles to reduce our energy use, improve the efficiency of our energy and resource use, and then use renewable and low carbon resources instead. So, for example, renewable electricity. With regards to marine actions, we're trying to recognise the importance of protecting and enhancing blue carbon, so things like seagrass, salt marsh, and to better monitor Devon's natural marine capital, and to do so, learn from existing strategies and mechanisms such as the North Devon Marine Capital Plan, and educate and advise the public on their impact, for example, what goes down their sink or where they put their anchor down. Do follow us on social and online. We've got a newsletter as well for the latest. And I will stop sharing and hope I haven't gone on too long. I think we're going to collect questions at the end after all three presentations. Is that right, Phil?
Yeah, that was the idea, was that we would have a bit of a chat after we've done the three presentations, in case we cover things that people are interested in during the other two presentations. So yeah, I'll carry on with mine. Thanks, Emily.
Brilliant, thanks.
So I'll just share my screen. So I should probably introduce myself properly, because I failed to do that at the very start. So I'm Phil Horton. I'm the Environment and Sustainability Manager at the RWA, and along with Ross, who's following me with his presentation from British Marine, we are the kind of management board, if you like, for the Green Blue, which is our joint environmental programme. So that sits within my team, within the RWA. So what I was going to do is just quickly run through our kind of policy and strategy around sustainability, to give you an idea of what we're up to at the moment. I'm assuming you can see the screen okay, Emily. I didn't check that actually. Good, okay, good. So about a year ago, we reviewed our environmental policy, which at the time was just a couple of lines in the employment handbook. And we reissued it in the kind of form that you would use for an environmental management system standard, as a kind of declaration of intent to avoid environmental harm and mitigate impacts where possible. And it was a real commitment from the management of the organisation to provide resources to deliver on this environmental policy statement, so that we manage and improve our environmental performance. So that's actually due for review again now, but I don't see us making any significant changes to it. It's kind of measuring and managing our own impacts and influencing what other people do within the industry as far as we can. So following on from that, we spent a long time developing our sustainability strategy. So we've put a 2020 to 2030 timeframe on this strategy, because 2030 is the deadline for achievement of the UN global goals. So that was a kind of key point internationally for reviewing where we're at. So we took the approach of consulting widely with staff and clubs and members to make sure that we were picking up everybody's viewpoints and taking all of that into account. So we consulted with around 200 people at 25 workshops over a period of 3 to 4 months towards the end of last year, luckily before any lockdown happened. So we did all of these face-to-face, or most of them face-to-face. I put together a first draft, and we reviewed that within our sustainability team, and also Dan Redding from World Sailing, who's our sustainability manager, who's speaking later, he reviewed it as well as a kind of external view on what we were doing. We revised the document, presented it to our CEO, and after that it went to the board on 24th of June this year. So that's now been approved as our major approach to sustainability within the organisation. And what we've done is we've split what we're doing into 3 main areas, or 3 zones of influence, if you like. So there's the bits we control, which is our own facilities and operations and staff, where we can really control significantly what people do. There's areas that we manage, like events, the pension fund investments, that kind of thing, where we don't have real detailed control of it, but we can actively manage what we do in those areas. So events, for example, we can influence the venue, we can manage what we do there at an event, but we can't manage really or control what people do coming to the events particularly. And then one of the most important areas for us is the influencing side of it. So that's all of our clubs and training centres and members and partners. And this is really important to us, because in that area, if we influence that 500,000 people a year who engage through one of those routes, to make a small change in what they do, then overall that will have a bigger positive effect than all we do in the kind of area of direct control that we have. So we thought it was important to kind of look at those three areas, and this is actually how the International Olympic Committee has split up their sustainability strategy as well. So we kind of stole that idea from them, if you like. So in terms of the strategy side of it, our kind of high-level strategic approach to it is embedding what we're talking about throughout the organisation through engagement and communication. And the key thing here is that it's no good us having a small group of people in a specialist team that is advising everybody else continually on what they should be doing from a sustainability perspective. That wouldn't work. We need to embed this in everything that the organisation does. So when people are making day-to-day decisions in the events team or in the training team, they're thinking about sustainability issues. Otherwise, we're never going to manage to deliver on what we're trying to achieve here. There's a consistency approach where we're now going to embed this strategy in the wider RWA strategic review. Normally, we would be doing that now for the next 4 years, but obviously with COVID coming along, we've got a kind of 1 year interim strategy that's being developed at the moment. And after that, we'll look again at the following 3 years. But the key thing is, the reason that I aimed to get this done by this time, to have this strategy ready by this time, was to feed into that wider 4 year review to make sure that we get it in as a cross-cutting theme in everything else that we do. We're also taking a tactical approach. That's the don't delay bit. So that's making sure that we don't see something that we could do now and wait until we've got all of the evidence available and all of the policies in place before taking some action. And that's a recognition that, particularly for climate change, it's something that we need to act on immediately and not wait. And then the final part of at a strategic level really is the check and improve, and that's things like putting in place an environmental management system to make sure we're auditing what we do, we're reviewing it, we're reporting, and we're making sure that we continually improve our approach. So the main output is that high level strategy, but then we've got an action plan which has got kind of 45 initial actions identified, split into 6 main areas really. So inspire, inform and enable, that's our kind of outreach element of what we do to clubs and members and the wider industry. Again, I've stolen that phrase as well. That's actually from the Centre for Alternative Technology, where I worked for a number of years. They've had that in place as their tagline for 40 years, and I couldn't really improve on it in terms of that outreach element of what we're trying to do. There's a transparency and people-centered approach. So this is making sure we tell people what we're doing. We're open about the problems we have and the difficulties we have, and we report clearly to our stakeholders and to the wider community about what we're doing. Key thing for us is developing zero pollution and zero waste pathways. So looking at, again, with our partners at the wider industry, but also what we do ourselves. And then developing a zero carbon pathway as well. So it's looking at how are we going to achieve what we want to achieve by 2030, stepping back from there, saying what do we need to do at different stages along that path. And Ross's presentation next has a kind of industry approach to that, which is great. So he'll talk quite a bit about that in terms of the route we need to take to get to these points over the next 10 years. We've put a specific element in there on promoting biodiversity net gain, which we can do through our responses to government consultations and the way we help our clubs do planning applications and so on. We thought we'd put that in as a specific area because in our view, the 2 major international issues are carbon and biodiversity. So we wanted to make sure we were covering that, even though it's not something that we can influence in such a strong way as we can carbon. We wanted to include that as well. And then there's clearly that influencing element through procurement and our partnerships. So those are the 6 main areas. I don't propose to go through all of the details of those. Clearly for this particular event, then the zero carbon pathway is the most important one. But I've got a couple of slides with some examples of those 6 areas just to show you the kind of things we're thinking about as we move forward. So inspiring, informing and enabling, it's continue to develop the green-blue materials to help people make their decisions, providing advice to staff as well to help them make changes, and embedding focus that we've put at the heart of the strategy. Transparency in people, there's a few things there, things like fair tax mark, reporting on progress, implementing environmental management systems, looking at our HR policies, making sure they comply with the UN Global Compact principles, and reporting on things like gender pay gaps and so on. Although we're not a large enough organisation to do that, to have to do that, we're going to start doing those kind of reporting elements as well. Zero waste and pollution, obviously there's plastics and the Pathway to Zero action plan. On zero carbon pathway, but also thinking carefully about things like carbon offset policies. There's a lot of questions about whether carbon offset really works, but there are some elements of what the RYA does, particularly thinking about the British sailing team and the Olympics team flying around the world. We can't avoid that. It's something we're going to have to look at offsetting or balancing in some other way. And then reporting annually again. Biodiversity, misspelled there, I've just spotted the typo. Again, I've already mentioned this, really promoting the biodiversity net gain through the response to consultations and continue to work with government on the Check Clean Dry and voting pathway action plans on invasive non-native species. And then procurement and partnerships. It's really looking at policies on that and assessing suppliers and pushing things up our supply chain. So in terms of what we've done over the last year or so, well, British Marine and the RYA re-signed our contract for the Green Blue and increased funding for that and relaunched our website. And we've got some new staff in the team as well to help us to deliver on what we're doing. So we have Olivia, who's our kind of a sustainability officer who's looking at our internal actions and working on events and so on. We've got Kat, who's administrative support to work with myself and Kate and Olivia on that. Kate runs the Green Blue, that's Kate there in the photo. And we also have Richard Hill in the team who works on the planning and environment side, so helping our response to marine license applications and so on. We've signed up to the UN Global Compact. This is something that all businesses can do to commit ourselves to wider sustainability issues as well as environmental side of things. It requires us to report annually on our contribution to the UN Global Goals, and I think it's a really good public declaration of what we're trying to achieve. And then on the kind of tactical side of things, I was mentioning we were going to make some decisions immediately as we see opportunities. So we've signed up with Ecotricity as a green energy supplier for all of our operations here in Hamble and also in Portland at the Weymouth National Sailing Academy. So this is signing up with a deep green energy supplier to make sure that all of our energy use in our buildings and in any electric vehicles we may have are all supplied from renewable sources. And we're looking at opportunities to roll that out to members and clubs as well and to promote that further. It's one of the easiest things that people can do in terms of an immediate impact on their carbon emissions. So where are we heading now? So I'm working on those 45 actions and producing a more detailed action plan, an implementation plan to make sure that we've got targets that I'm set internally and that the team are set to achieve. And we're working with our Planning and Sustainability Committee on that. We have an external committee that advises us on these issues. We're looking at appointing sustainability champions in each team within the RYA to promote that embedding, and we're going to train them on the principles and also train them on environmental auditing as well to help us out with that. And then we're looking to get certification to ISO 14001, the environmental management standard, and ISO 20012 which is a specific version of that for event management, hopefully by the end of this financial year, although that's a challenging target for us to meet. So thank you. That's a kind of brief outline of where we're at, and it's one of the reasons why we decided to work with Emily and others on setting up this event today. You can find the details of our strategy. There's a kind of executive summary that's only a few pages long, and there's the full report with all the references in it on that very short URL on our website. So we'll share the presentations afterwards, so you can just click on the link rather than trying to write that down, but it's all available through the RYA's website. So thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing and hand over to Ross to tell you what British Marine are up to as well.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, let me just try and share. I think that's the right one.
Yep, that looks good. It's white at the moment. There we go. Yeah, that's good.
There we go. Hi, everyone. So my name's Ross Wanwell. I'm the Head of Technical Services at British Marine. Hopefully, a lot of you will know who we are. For those who don't, we are the membership organisation supporting the marine industry. So we're like the trade association of the marine industry. Everyone from boat builders for recreation, small commercial, super yacht sector, all the way through to insurance, finance. We kind of cover the whole spectrum of companies who, in effect, support people's enjoyment of the water in the UK. We've been around for quite a while. We were established in 1913, and we have about 1,500 members covering all of the different areas throughout the UK and some of the marinas within our Taiha association overseas as well. The environment particularly is one of our main 5 industry pillars moving forward, so it's extremely important for us. What I'd like to do is just talk you through the environmental roadmap that we have been working on for the last it must be about 18 months now, and how we're going to move forward as an industry. So it was about 18 months ago. We were looking at the changes that were occurring. We were looking at how consumers were looking at the environment as part of their kind of purchasing power, their purchasing choices, and we were looking at how our industry, impacted the environment, which is in effect our playground. It's where we enjoy our time. And with so many different things occurring at the same time, so many different risks, so many different areas that we had to concentrate on, we decided we need to, as an industry, pull it all together and have a look at a consolidated approach, to the changes that were occurring. So what we did is we in effect highlighted a number of areas of risks and challenges to the industry. And then we went out to our membership. Within our membership, as I say, we have 1,500 companies, throughout the breadth of the recreational marine industry. And we worked with them on identifying the top risks. What were the areas where they were really concerned that we hadn't got solutions to the challenges that we were being faced with. So we had 390 responses over an 8 or 9 month period in various workshops, committee meetings throughout the country. And what we did with that data is we brought it all together, and they identified 6 main areas of risk and concern that the industry had in regard to the environment, from recycling and waste management all the way through to climate change. Now, with those main 6 areas, we then had a look at, what were the challenges? How were the challenges coming to us? What do we need to be aware of? So what we did is we identified the targets which have been set by government, the various legislation and requirements that are coming through the pipeline, and we set them out in timelines. This showed industry, what we needed to do, what we needed to achieve, and by when. It gave us a roadmap. It gave us a pathway to achieving, hopefully by 2050, what the government wants us to achieve. We then had a look at each of these areas, and we identified risks, solutions, hopefully getting our members, getting industry as a whole to start looking at those challenges that are coming, understanding what the challenges are, and understanding when we needed to find solutions by. This will help us meet those requirements and give us some long-term business planning ability. Now, over the next year, the next 18 months, we're now going to draw down and we're going to create working groups within industry looking at each of the 6 main sectors. Those working groups will get together, they'll have a look at the roadmap, see what challenges we're being faced with in the future, and look at finding industry-based solutions. It's going to be member-led strategy, and we need to achieve, these objectives whilst maintaining businesses' ability to operate. The last thing we want to do is to try and do things which are unable to be achieved, or have regulations put in front of us which we cannot achieve. It's about managing the transition to a much greener, cleaner industry. Our role as British Marine, as the industry trade body, is not to dictate the solutions, but it's to support industry to find their way to the end point, enable their responses we're there to engage with government, agencies and authorities and other stakeholders, to make sure that the regulations, as and when they come, are achievable and they're workable. And we're going to be working with stakeholders, both in the marine sector, but also other sectors, on finding alternative solutions. And one of our projects at the moment is looking at technology transfer from other different industries, and many of our members, some of which are here today with us, have been engaging with other industries to look at what solutions we can transfer from some of the other industries that may be ahead of us in regard to the solutions that they've found. That's really the environmental roadmap, the industry environmental roadmap. It is only one area that we're working on at the moment. I think some of the other areas are just up there on screen. For those of you that have been to the Southampton Boat Show over the last few years, hopefully you've seen some change. So we run the boat show on behalf of industry. We've brought in an environmental charter, an environmental pledge. So hopefully you will have seen that no bottled drinks are available on site from the concessionaries now moving forward. So that's a change we brought in last year. Single-use plastic's been removed from the show in regard to, again, the concessionaries, the food and drink stands. We're working with our exhibitors, asking them to sign up to a pledge to not have certain things on their stand to ensure that they recycle on their stand. So we've got a 5-year plan for the boat show. We're working on cross-sector technology transfer. So we're introducing our members to members of other sectors. So the motorsports, the automotive sectors, who are a bit ahead of us in regard to the technologies that they have within their products. We're looking to try and beg, borrow and steal their information, their knowledge and their experience to bring it into the marine sector. We have the green blue that Phil's previously mentioned. We've put a lot more resource into the green blue over the last couple of years. Hopefully you've seen the green directory. The green directory is a directory of green products available on the Green Blue website, in which any consumer can go and have a look and find out whether or not there's a greener alternative to what they're already using. We're asking companies to continue to sign up. It's just in its first 6 months, so we're drawing in more and more products, and it's voluntary. It's so that consumers, you can go and have a look and find out whether or not there's a greener alternative to help you and your family be greener when you're boating. And then coming soon is a new environmental services directory where we'll be highlighting where you can use or have a more environmental or a better environmental services for your boat. So for example, this means things like, where can you recycle? Where can you take stuff off your boat and recycle it? Which marinas have those facilities? Which marinas have pump out facilities for both black and grey water? Which marinas have filtration systems for when you're jet washing your boat? Those are the sorts of things we're trying to raise awareness of so that consumers can be greener when they're boating. And that's it from me. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop the environmental roadmap in the chat. So if you would like to get a copy, please just click on the link and you'll be able to download a copy. It's freely accessible to everyone. And I'll hand back to Phil.
Great. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, really interesting. And yeah, thanks to Emily as well. And hopefully that gives you kind of a bit of context and a bit of information about where we're heading as a boating community as well, which I think is really important. And hopefully it's important to the manufacturers as well to see that there's a lot of support out there for what they're trying to do. And there's going to be demand for what they're doing as well. So we don't seem to have any questions yet on the chat, and we don't have any hands raised. So on the basis that everybody's happy with what they've heard so far, we'll hand over to Dan Redding from World Sailing, who's going to talk to us about their Challenge 2024 project and where that's progressed to. And once he's finished that, we'll have some a Q&A session, and hopefully we'll get some questions from you all on where we're headed. So over to you, Dan.
Great, thank you. And thanks very much, Phil and Emily, for the invitation to talk a bit about our Challenge 2024. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. Okay, hopefully that's working.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, thumbs up, great.
That's good.
So I thought I'd just start with giving a bit of context as to who World Sailing are. it rebranded about 3 years ago. So it used to be ISAF, but essentially it's the International Federation. So we look after kind of the sport of sailing in all its forms. So that includes kite surfing, windsurfing, dinghy sailing, yacht racing, and even model boat racing as well. So we're a membership organisation formed of national federations such as the OIA in 146 different countries, and also class associations. And we have about 115 of those. So that's kind of world sailing, and we're responsible for, you may have seen like the rules of sailing, promoting the sport, training of international judges, and also managing the events such as the Olympics, and sanctioning some of the big events in the sport, such as the Ocean Race, America's Cup, Star Sailors League, and things like that. Yeah, as you can see here. So these are our, we call them special events, but essentially they're sanctioned. So we offer different services to them, and that kind of links to this project, but I'll explain why a little bit later. So we have an overarching, pretty similar, I suppose, to what British Marine and ROA have done. So an overarching roadmap, Sustainability Agenda 2030. We started to put this together about 2 years ago now, and that involved well, first of all, we set up a commission of experts. We spent a few days trying to work out what our scope was, what we can influence, and clearly through the regulation in terms of the sport, there's quite a bit we can do. We then had a global consultation, hearing back from 75 countries, and then also put it out to a vote to all of our membership, which then got unanimous support. So now have a kind of a mandate to work across these different sustainability targets, of which there are 56, so quite a few. But they're very broad in terms of we're working towards many of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that ranges from carbon, climate action, to gender equality, and everything in between. So the two targets that kind of link to today's conversation, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, is firstly to reduce the amount of coach boats at our events, and we can do that really through policy. So that's slightly more straightforward. But then a more challenging one is for official boats at our events to not be solely reliant on fossil fuels by 2025. And that certainly is a challenge. And hence the name that we have at something called Challenge 2024, which is a call to industry to move in the direction of kind of hybrid, hydrogen, electric boats. This slide just really gives an overview just to show how sort of diverse some of the targets are and what we're working on. As I mentioned, it's a variety of different topics. So world sailing, and I'm really pleased to see that the ROA is also now a signatory to the United Nations Climate Change and Sports for Climate Action Framework. And that is essentially getting sports from, well, all different types across the world. So we've got everything from Formula One, Formula E, to the NHL, NBA, and quite a few sailing organisations, ranging from clubs, even classes such as IMOCA, individual boats, and ourselves and some of our M&As. So this is really to work in partnership with some of the other sport entities, and as Ross said, people like the automotive industries, so with Formula One, Formula E, have similar kind of ambitions, and we're looking to do quite a bit of knowledge share, certainly in terms of like end of life of carbon fibre and some of the hybrid technologies that are being used. So this is the challenge, one of the challenges. This is a photo of one of our events. So the British sailing team would have attended this. This was our World Cup series in Marseille, as you can see, and just lots and lots of coach boats. So typically at our events, we will have the boats that we use. So that will be for officials. Then you'll have boats for broadcast purposes, sometimes security, and then all these coach boats. So this, I think, is just a simple illustration of the scale of the issue, or the scale of the opportunity, I think. So I was the sustainability manager for London 2012, and was able to get all the data about how much fuel was used just for that regatta. And so LOCOG is the organising committee. So that would be some of the kind of safety boats and things like that. We have team boats, which is essentially the like British sailing team and equivalent, so coach boats. The police, and the police obviously had a big area to secure, and I think they were given free fuel cards because they were, as you can see, doing a lot of patrolling. And then OBS, which is the Olympic Broadcast Service, and it splits. I can't see the side of this, but it splits up between petrol and diesel. And just on that, I've got a couple of figures here relating to that. So the amount of fuel that was used just by team boats for this single regatta was the same as 12 Formula One races. And the fuel used by the organising committee was the same as 17 Formula One races. So actually, you know, it's a relatively large amount of fuel and obviously carbon emissions. However, when we compare that to something like the FIFA World Cup, which emits 2.1 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So it's something that we thought that we need to focus on, and certainly looking to work with the International Olympic Committee and future host countries such as Paris 2024. One of the next steps was to work with some so different research institutions, and this is TUI Delft. So we have a world championship, which will be, should be 2022 in The Hague. And as part of the kind of the legacy before the event, they're looking to develop a coach boat, which actually is going to be hopefully using hydrogen, but looking at the user profile. So they stuck a couple of GPS units on some coach boats for the Dutch Olympic team to show kind of maximum speed, the user profile, which would give us a bit of a better understanding of what our parameters would be with Challenge 2024 for industry. Now, clearly, this is even though it's kind of dinghy sailing, but at an Olympic level, what you find is, so we know kind of maximum speeds for different boats, be it a laser up to something like a NACRA, and with some of those races, we will also kind of rely on the coaches to act as safety boats. So there is a big safety element to this. So we have to be confident that if we're going to transition, that the boats that are either electric, hydrogen or whatever are going to be able to serve the purpose that we need them for. But I'm really excited to see all of the different progress that's been made by different companies who I think we're going to hear from today. And clearly there's a range. So if you're operating on a small lake, just training optimists, then your user profile would be relatively slow and probably not using it all day. Whereas some of the profiles here will have people kind of training 5 days a week, and they'll be on the water for 8 hours. So something to consider. So this is the challenge that we came up with. These are the different points. So for 2024, this is so for the Olympics in 2024, working with the Olympic Committee, this is what we're hoping to achieve in terms of the boats that are bought. And different organising committees do different things, but effectively there'll be, there's a market there for about 250 boats that will be purchased or taken on a higher basis. So typically so around 6 meters, non-combustion engine. We also did some work with Southampton University, looking at the carbon emissions from the transport of the boats to and from events. So we're looking at kind of international competition, and the ability to stack the boats to fit more in a container actually had a significant impact on the overall carbon emissions on the boats. And this is hopefully have a range of 8 hours with a maximum speed of 30 knots and an average of 10 knots, which I know is extremely challenging, but that's kind of what we're hoping will be achievable by that time. And then finally, applying life cycle assessments, so looking at materials that will be used. I think that's very important. And then finally, to be affordable. So we haven't set a price range, and having different conversations with different producers, actually, what we can find is that if there's a return on investment because your fuel bill goes down over a couple of years, then something can be deemed affordable. But what we don't want to do as kind of an international federation is disadvantage some of the sailing nations, whereby if a rib is too expensive for them because we've specified a new regulation and they can't compete, that's not what we want to do. So we're looking at different ways of incentivizing this in the years to come, and then also making it more accessible for basically all countries that are competing in our events. Working with some of our special events where they have considerable budgets. So SailGP, as an example, they put out an RFP for looking at all the boats that they use. So it's not just the kind of the small ribs, it's everything. So trying to create that market and working with some of those events is one way of doing that. So I think, as I mentioned, about 380 ribs have been used in the past, 130 to, well, it does vary, and seeing as we're going to have an offshore event in 2024, there'll be different profiles that were needed, but there is going to be that big bulk purchase, hopefully, further down the line. I just thought I'd sort of show this as an update, because I know some of the others will be talking about what they've produced, but this was the kind of the concept boat. Although when they sent me the details, I was kind of like, well, it doesn't look like it's going to float, and B, it's I'm not sure how fast it's going to go, but it's effectively what they've done is it's kind of a proof of concept. But of course, with hydrogen, you've then got some challenges such as the provision of supply, and also probably some challenging regulations about having some high-speed boats carrying hydrogen on. So a bit of work to do there. And also, I think there's some other opportunities. This is Energy Observer, and they use fuel cells with the technology from Toyota. And having conversations with them, they're not protecting the IP from the fuel cells. They're pretty keen for everybody to use it. So I think there's, and this is not particularly for coach boats, but for other boats, I think there's going to be, for larger sailing boats, there's going to be lots of potential there. So that's kind of just rattled through some of the rationale why we decided to challenge the industry, hopefully a bit of insight into the progress, and look forward to taking any questions, if there are any.
Great, thanks, Dan. That was great. We haven't got any questions on the chat yet, so I've got a couple of questions after that to try and kick it off a bit, really. So you did some work on looking at the usage patterns for the coach boat side of it. Are you aware of any information that's out there that would help manufacturers in terms of typical club usage and typical usage by harbour authorities and so on?
I know there's some research being done with various clubs, but even that, I think, there's quite a range depending on if you have kind of full-time staff, so people are out on the water, so that your more sort of high performance centres. But I think and some of the others might be able to better answer this, because I know some people have been doing putting GPS trackers on different fleets. But I think I mean, that's something that we could certainly promote, looking at gathering more data to help with the development of that. Because I think predominantly we've been looking at the kind of the high performance stuff. So yeah, it'd be interesting if we could maybe work with some RWA clubs on that.
So we've got a comment come in from Graham Russell. Hi Graham, I've been up there in Scotland. She's saying racing should be an easy part of the sector to decarbonise. Most RWA members are cruisers and the cost of re-engineering is not trivial. So a key driver will be availability of diesel. And as other sectors decarbonise, then we'll be kind of following in their wake, I guess, is what you're saying there. And that is something that I think is a challenge. I mean, for the first time, I have my own boat as of a week ago. And it's a 40-year-old boat with a 40-year-old diesel engine. And I guess the question is, you know, what point is it going to be viable for me to re-engine that onto electric, given the usage patterns of those? Because it probably will get about 50 hours a year of use. So there are some kind of complex ideas there and issues there, I guess, that the industry needs to address.
Yeah, and I think from Ross
Just stuck his hand up.
Just from our perspective, we were looking at what we can control and influence, and clearly through racing rules and events that we host sanction, that's something that we can manage effectively. I think what we're hoping, and certainly when you look at other sports like the Formula E's, is that the technology. So if you're looking at people like SailGP, America's Cup, where they've got big R&D budgets, that in theory some of that technology will filter down, and we're sort of optimistic that might happen in the cruising kind of sector. I know that there's a lot of effort being put into kind of biocomposites and things more about the build of some of those boats. But yeah, Ross, I think you're probably better positioned to pick that question up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, you know, part of the work that we're doing is looking at a stepping stone to electrification, if electrification is the solution. And I don't think we've actually answered the question of what the solution is yet. Some of the work that we're doing at the moment is talking to a number of manufacturers of alternative fuels to understand whether or not, you know, there is an initial need to change the infrastructure, you know, or is actually at this stage the transition to more biofuel or alternative fuels with lower emissions a good first step on that pathway to long-term emissions reduction. And I think, you know, one of the things we're grappling with at the moment is, you know, we're just at the start of what's going to be a very long road. We don't have the data, the knowledge, or the information to jump straight to an answer. We need to look at the long-term transition. So, you know, asking people to take out engines and replace with, you know, 10, 15,000 pound replacements, probably not the answer at this stage. You know, however, the use of alternative fuels, which maybe have lower either carbon cycles, you know, if you're looking at biofuels, there are also things such as GTL, which is it's a diesel replacement, which is created from natural gas, but which has 40 to 60% less particulate emissions and 30 to 40% CO emissions. They are maybe the short-term solutions to lowering emissions, whilst we look at what the long-term plan is. You know, electric is a very, it's very well talked about at the moment. But it may not be the universal solution, and as part of that we need to take boaters with us. You know, we have a one-use-fits-all solution at the moment, an engine with a fuel tank which will do everything. You know, it will go for a day if you want, it will go at high speed if you want. And actually we need to better understand how boats are used, and we need boaters to understand that maybe there isn't a direct replacement. Maybe we need to understand what they want to do with the boat and then find the right solution for their type of usage moving forward. So we're right at the start, and we have to look at in effect, a long-term strategy, a long-term plan to zero emissions. It's not going to happen overnight, and we're not going to just be able to directly replace what we already have.
I think that's right, Ross, and I think that kind of comes back to this idea of having the pathway, doesn't it, where we say where we want to be in 10, 15, 20 years time, and we work back from there and say what do we need to achieve at each stage. And I suppose key at this point is making sure we don't put a whole load of infrastructure in, a whole load of new equipment in that's then no use to us in 5 years time. We need to think about how that part of the transition works. I think coming back to Graham's question, reading between the lines there, I mean, it's thinking about if you're on the west coast of Scotland, you're not going to be able to turn up to a marina and have a choice of 5 different fuels. There isn't enough use there for that to happen. And so, you know, we're based on the south coast, and we have, or up the Thames estuary or whatever, and you know, there it will be possible to have hydrogen and biofuels and charging points and everything available because the usage levels are high. But if you go to the Western Isles of Scotland, it will only be able to have one source of energy there, and that might, in the interim, be a biodiesel to keep the existing fleet going. And we need to think about that part of the transition as well, so it works for everybody and not just the kind of highly populated areas here in the south. So it's a complex process. And the other thing I'd say in response to that is that I worked for a long time in the renewables industry, and we need to avoid what happened there, which was that the wind people would come along and say solar was no good and wind was the only answer, and then the solar people would come along and say solar is the only answer and we shouldn't have any wind. And we've got to avoid that kind of argument between the different technologies, because I think we will need all of them. We will need all of those approaches. We will need hybrid, we will need biofuels, we will need pure electric. We need to accept all of those things, and the different parts of the industry need to kind of be accepting of other parts as well. There's plenty to go at out there. This big industry, and there's room for all of these technologies, I think, is probably a key point, really. I'm just going down the questions now to see what else we have.
The other part of that, I just add, is that so your point about if you're on the west coast of Scotland and still going to marina, that actually there's we've got charging points in marinas, so there's kind of an infrastructure already there that I think the automotive kind of sector is still working on, and we've set some regulations about Cat 1, 2, 3 racing boats, and so it's more about proportion of energy that's used has to be renewable. And I know some of the, obviously at the moment, more well-resourced teams are investing in electric engines. So Alex Thompson, Hugo Boss is a good example. And as those regulations take effect from new boats built, hopefully that's something that will possibly filter down in the cruising market, because they are slightly bigger. So sorry, Phil, go back to you.
That's right. There's a couple more questions that come through. So Alex Watley is saying about the issues of sourcing materials and so on, and us being a fairly small market. And I think that's will fall out of the wider transport infrastructure changes. We won't be able to influence it to the extent that road transport does. But we do have some very specialist requirements. And some quite high-end requirements as well in some cases. So I think there'll be a mix of that. I think the kind of average boater will end up with whatever we end up with for the rest of the transport infrastructure ultimately. But it's important that we influence that transition so that it meets our needs, I guess. Rivers asked about, are any of your organisations talking to boat manufacturers to change the style of boat to make them easier to push and use less energy? I think that Jamie later on in his presentation is going to talk a bit about that. So we maybe you'll get an answer to that as part of Jamie's presentation. I had a quick look through what he was going to talk about earlier on, and he certainly, he has some interesting looking designs. Ross, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I mean, as the trade association of all the boat builders, there's certainly the companies are looking at efficiency as part of this process. It's got to be, a major part of moving forward is how efficiently you use the energy which is on board. So yeah, it's definitely part of the discussion, and it was also one of the main objectives or expectations from the government in their Clean Maritime Plan. So that what we as an industry have been set includes a requirement to become more efficient as part of it. Yeah.
Okay. So Ross, you might be able to ask this next one from Rob as well, which is there are a number of government incentives available now for low carbon vehicles. Are there any planned or proposed by the industry for the marine sector?
Yeah, there is a surprising amount of support at the moment from the government in regard to R&D looking into alternative propulsion. Certainly, a number of our companies are engaging on, with those funds, and some of the products that you'll start to see coming out over the next year or two. A lot of the support will have come from government to enable, the R&D to go into the development of those products. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so I think that's the development side of it, and I guess we could. It's an important point actually. We could be lobbying government when we're seeing these lobbies for diesel scrappage schemes and so on for cars. That once the technology's there, that's probably something that we would need to be lobbying government to provide in our sector as well, to if they want to encourage people to switch. So you obviously wouldn't want to scrap your boat, but you might want to scrap your engine.
Yeah, and Phil, if I could just add, I mean, we've looked, and as part of the research we're doing, especially with the end of life question, which I saw a little bit earlier as well, is that boats have a very long life cycle. Mm-hmm. With cars, the average is 9-10 years before that product is taken out and a more environmental replacement is input into society. With boats, GRP, it's 50-60 years at the moment on the GRP fleet, but then on our inland sector, it's plus 100 years on some boats. So, we're going to have to look at incentives because of the long life cycle of the products within within the marine industry. We're certainly going to have to talk to government about it in the future once we've identified the ways and means of achieving, what they're asking us to do.
So David Kendall's come back and said he's designing some new electric power boats with more efficient hull forms. David, do you want to come on and tell us what you're up to there? Interested to hear.
Yes, hopefully I've just unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's great.
I'll put my video on as well. Yeah, we've been spending about the last 6 months looking at totally trying to change the use of cruising powerboats and get away from the perception that you need to sort of blast around in a planing boat at 30+ knots, because very few of them actually spend much time doing 30+ knots. And when they do, it's very noisy, it's very uncomfortable. Even if you have an electric boat doing 30 knots, it's very noisy and it's very uncomfortable. And I'm sort of coming more from a sailing background. Where we're sort of happy if we're cruising at 5 or 6 knots. That's how we do our sort of passage planning, and not always in the right direction. So thinking of it from a powerboating perspective, if we can do 10 to 12 knots and in any direction, then that's pretty good for sort of passage planning. And we are looking at a range of electric boats. The first one just under 11 meters. 2 double cabins, very novel hull form. I did just post a picture on the chat, with an electric range probably around sort of 40-50 miles, but also with a relatively small diesel generator, so that we unlimited range, but we can easily do sort of cross-channel distances, or from sort of mainland Mediterranean countries to Mediterranean islands, those sort of passages. I know one of the things people always sort of question is whether the infrastructure for charging electric boats. But this sort of size of electric boat will charge overnight on a standard shore power supply. There is still the concern that we've all been in marinas where the shore power doesn't work and it trips out and those sort of things. And it's another reason we have a diesel generator on the boat at this stage. But it's also interesting to note that in places like Monaco, Saint-Tropez, there are now ultra-fast superchargers available. Anyone interested, look up Vita Power, and they've developed a super fast electric boat, but they're also installing charging infrastructure for super fast charging, like sort of Tesla superchargers in marinas along the coast of France. So that's going to come as well. And there's a scheme in Holland as well for installing dedicated electric boat charging points. And also, I know they are also looking at schemes where you can use boat batteries. The grid can use boat batteries for sort of dumping cheap electricity and drawing it back at peak times.
So
and
the
pay
vehicle to
for
grid
that.
model, yeah, the vehicle to grid model that we're seeing with electric cars now. Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
And
that's great.
Yeah, you that may well pay for your sort of electrification of a boat. You're generating income, and you know we all know how little pleasure boats are generally used. They're sitting in marinas most of the time, and they're going to be a huge source of battery power sitting in marinas. So there's all sorts of possibilities in the future of different financial models.
Great.
But it's also interesting, when we first started this, we thought, electric boat is going to be incredibly heavy, it's going to be incredibly expensive and everything else. But if you compare it, I mean, we are only going to do sort of 12 knots, maybe 14 knots, that sort of speed. But if you compare it to the weight of, a couple of 200 horsepower diesels that's in a typical cruising boat of that size, and the cost of those, we're going to be pretty cost effective. And incredibly cheap to run. I mean, it's just unbelievable. We'd drive here to France for £12 or something. It's just crazily cheap. And it's partly because we changed the whole form, we've changed the perception. It's not just what we were desperately trying to avoid was just chucking in batteries and electric motors into an existing hull, which has been done, and it sort of helps demonstrate some feasibility. People like Nimbus have done that, but they're boats which are designed for higher speed, and they don't work at low speed. They're not comfortable, they're not efficient. So we're optimizing something that is, highly optimized in the sort of 8 to 12 knot range. So it's still way above its displacement hull speed. But that's through.
Thanks, David. That's really interesting. That's brilliant. Yeah.
So we're looking at a moment of schemes for funding as well, and you mentioned about there's a lot of funding out there for electric cars, electric vehicles, not just cars, but most of them specifically exclude marine. We've looked
so
at
maybe Ross could advise on that. I mean, Ross probably knows some of those sources. So if you're a British Marine member, I'm sure you'll be able to access that information. And
the big question is getting across to Innovate UK and people that the need is there. And they will then have specific competitions. And there are, anybody who's interested in funding, there are more general competitions. And there's a Sustainable Innovation Fund at the moment that's open for applicants. It's not specific at all. It's for anything. So we're going to put a punt into that, see what happens.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. There's a couple of points here from Graham and from Susan Scott about actually passage planning and actually making sure that people sail most of the time rather than using their engines. And that's actually that's a great point, actually. Sue, you're saying about a big push on the improvement of sailing skills for yacht owners. I'm not sure whether it's a skills thing, but it's a kind of approach thing, I guess. And as a relatively recent owner of an electric car, I can tell you when you have restricted range, it does change your behaviour and how fast you go and how you drive. And I think if you had more restricted range on your yacht, you probably would sail as much as you possibly can and avoid using your engine if you knew you had to charge it again at the end of the day. So I think it is a kind of perception thing apart from anything else. And the passage planning side of it, making sure that you sail most of the route is really important. I think people doing long journeys, quite often if they've got a deadline, they'll start using their engine when the wind dies down. And I think we maybe need to take a slightly different approach to it. I mean, certainly when I get my EV out on the motorway and I'm heading a long distance, I keep at 50 miles an hour because I know I'll go a lot further that way than if I try and get there 10 minutes quicker by going at 70. And it's an attitude thing, which is quite interesting. There's a note from Alex there saying at the University of Plymouth they're working on a project with Plymouth Boat Trips to develop an electric passenger vessel with a link there. So that may be interesting for people to have a look at that if they want to. Alex, do you want to tell us briefly about that?
Yeah, hi folks. It's not a project I'm working on directly. So my role within the university is to connect businesses into our academic expertise and our specialist facilities. I work mainly with companies in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, and this is a project supported by my colleagues working on funded projects on the east side of the Tamar in Devon, specifically through the Marine Business Technology Centre, which is a consortia project delivered by Plymouth City Council, Universities of Plymouth and Exeter, Plymouth Marine Laboratories and the Marine Biological Association. But we've got a big focus on autonomous vessels and alternative propulsion, including electric. And actually one of the biggest projects or biggest parts of the project there is not just looking at the technology of physically how do you, in this first instance, convert an existing vessel to electric and still have commercially pressured duty cycles that it has to meet. But also how do you get through that regulation with the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency? We mentioned earlier on, or it was mentioned around hydrogen. Obviously there are combustion issues with hydrogen, but many batteries have lots of metals in them that end in ium, which my schoolboy chemistry helps me remember that things like that like to catch fire a lot. So issues around how you get through the regulatory compliance of commercially available electric vessels is a really interesting one, and it's great to have the MCA taking a big interest in this particular project. But great. Yeah, this is very definitely something that affects the technology, the naval architecture, the infrastructure, the regulation, and looking to design bespoke vessels is obviously a great way to go, but it's a massive capital commitment for businesses, and so I think there are a lot of people looking at the retrofit market.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I know Ross, you're involved in various programs looking at the safety aspects, aren't you, in terms of batteries and so on, standards?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, so from a business point of view, standardization. So I chair the British Standards Committee for Small Craft. We input into the ISO standards development. Jamie, who's on the call as well, he supports me on the electrification side, where Jamie's a UK expert sitting on the new international standard for lithium-ion batteries for marine use. We've spent a lot of time in the past creating the international standard for electric propulsion systems. So it's basically enabling business to be able to use these new technologies instead of having to do all the R&D themselves, is giving them a good standard to use for the safety aspect. And we spend a lot of time working both internationally and in the UK with, like Alex said, with the MCA, trying to get them to accept changes is sometimes hard with how long it takes for regulations to change. So working with the MCA at the moment on even something as simple as petrol being allowed on commercial vessels on SCVs. We're talking about that at the moment, looking at hydrogen, looking at fuel cell technologies, and making sure that the reviews and revisions of the regulations at the moment that are going on are actually taking into account the possible future technologies. We can't just make things safer based upon today's technology. We need to, in effect, prepare the regulations for the next levels of technology that are coming through as well.
So I know the sorry, I was going to say, I know the Port of London Authority, they've just they're doing sea trials on their hybrid pilot vessel, and I think the regulations at the moment mean that when they're actually doing a pilot transfer, they have to have the diesel engines running, just because of the way the rules are set up at the moment. So yes, there's obviously quite a lot of changes required there. Sorry, Alex, you.
I was just going to say that a couple of other points. It's interesting that, from the great presentations we had to kick off the event, there was a really interesting line drawn there that sailing wasn't the thing that was creating the potential emissions here. To see the fuel use compared to Formula One when we're looking at supporting sailing events is quite astounding. And in the same vein, actually, if you look at emissions from vessels, as you start to get bigger and look at cruising yachts, there's a huge amount of emissions and economically a massive amount of cost. And one of the biggest downtimes to charter vessels in particular is on generators rather than on main propulsion. And when you're talking about hybrids, looking at hybrid generation is as important as hybrid propulsion. There's been a lot of work done by a business down here in the west of Cornwall, Triskel Marine, around what they see as the technical and economic break-even point on hybrid propulsion, and as a result they've moved away from hybrid propulsion units and they've developed a product called Integral, which is actually a hybrid charging unit which is aimed at displacing diesel generators on leisure vessels. We're specifically looking at capturing the inefficiency between the power curve of an engine and the power absorption curve of a propeller, and using the difference between the two to effectively capture an electrical stream that can then be used to run air conditioning and refrigeration whilst you're at anchor or otherwise not going along. So that I think is also a key part of decarbonising, certainly the leisure side of marine, although that has great translations into everything up to cruise ships, which have massive hotel loads. But also looking at hydrogen, it's not just a fuel in its own right. There's been some great work up in the Orkneys looking at using hydrogen as an injected fuel into the air intakes of diesel engines to reduce the use of diesel. And that was Innovate UK funded project. With I'll post a link in the chat. There's some really interesting stuff that's come out of that as well. So looking at electrification as the only way in which we can decarbonise, I think is quite short-sighted. As I mentioned earlier on, you could not, there is not enough copper in the world to make electric motors to replace every vehicle we have, whether that's marine or road transport, and into an electric vehicle. So it's about changing the fuels, but it's about changing the usage and thinking about how we're going to meet that need across the entire transport range rather than just looking at marine in isolation.
Great, thanks Alex. Yeah. Graham's just made a point there about keeping an eye on what's happening in commercial maritime sector and road vehicles, because yeah, he makes a good point that of course most of the engines that we have in our boats are marinized road vehicle engines, and so we probably will see a similar thing happen with the transitions we're seeing now. We will see that technology moving across into what we're doing. But yes, I don't think anybody's suggesting electric is the only answer. I think it's an area that's where we have product available now, and so it's an important thing for us to discuss at the moment. But in the long term, clearly there's going to be hybrid and alternative fuel input as well to make this work for everybody. I'm just checking down. There were a couple of questions earlier on about end-of-life boats, which is maybe slightly outside the scope of the discussion here, but obviously that is something of great importance. And I see Philip Easthill's on the line, so he's head of the European Boating Industry Federation, and so they're working with across Europe on a project on end-of-life boats and fiberglass, and working with the wider kind of composites industry on that as well. So that's certainly something that we're interested in, and British Marine are interested in, and as I say, EBI. And actually, in my role, I'm also Environment Secretary for the European Boating Association, which is the kind of boat user end of side of what the EBI does in Europe. So yeah, we're all involved in those discussions as well. I think it's interesting talking about shortages of materials and so on. And I don't know whether Ross has anything to say on that, but it's one of those things where I think we can overthink it if we're not careful. I think if we start getting shortages of certain materials, then industry will find another way of doing it. And I don't know whether Ross would agree with that. I don't know. We can't overthink this at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, materials is part of our environmental roadmap. So it's analysing and looking at what materials are available, what materials are being used, and what's likely to be used. So it will be part of the work that we do over the next 18 months, not only with, say, copper for the electrification side, but also things like natural hardwoods. As an industry, we do need to look at all the various impacts that we have and ensure that across the board, we are looking to change, and it just takes time to go through that process, which is what the roadmap's hopefully going to set out the framework for how we can achieve it.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think that nicely brings us up to lunchtime, I think. So if people want to stay on the line, that's absolutely fine. But please don't feel obliged to be here and having conversations with people. And we'll get everything up and running again probably about 1:10 and at 1:15 we'll kick off with Steve, who I see is there ready and waiting to talk about e-propulsion and what they're up to. So
yeah,
thank you
Phil,
all for your
I'm
input so far.
just going to say I'm going to pause the recording, but I'm going to keep the meeting open.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. In this second part, we're going to look at what's available on the market at the moment, and how we might meet the needs of clubs and harbour authorities around the coast with what we can see at the minute, and then we'll have a discussion after that about what the gaps are in information that's needed for the manufacturers and for the boat users, so that we can progress things and increase the take up. So be good now to hear from Steve from ePropulsion, who's going to tell us a little bit about what they've been up to on the electric boating side of things. So thanks, Steve, and I'll hand over to you now.
Hello, and thank you. Let's just see. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yes, thank you. So yeah, my name's Steve Bruce from a company called Special Boat Service Limited, and we first got into electric propulsion in 2014. The path into electric propulsion for us is we have developed a range of rigid inflatable boats, and their unique quality is the fact that they fold down to about a third of their operating size, which obviously makes transportation and storage much easier. And we've found that the target markets for that product in the main have been yacht tenders, and where, of course, storage space and weight is always a bit of an issue. But equally, what we learned was that, of course, storing a small combustion motor was not ideal in those situations as well. So pretty much from day one, we were supplying about 30% of the boats that went out the door with small electric outboards, typically a 1 kilowatt outboard, which would easily push that little boat along at about sort of 4 or 5 knots, and with the battery technology at the time, would easily give you sort of 30 minutes or an hour or 5 or 6 miles of range. So that then progressed. In 2016, we got the opportunity to work with ePropulsion, and we became their distributor for the UK and Ireland. And that has had quite a dramatic effect on the sale of electric outboards, certainly with regards to foldable ribs, where we're at now something like 80% of the boats that go out the door go with electric outboards. And again, it's still primarily a small 1 kilowatt motor, because that is generally the answer for that sort of application. More recently, we have started to look at more powerful applications for larger vessels. Right now, we're working on a project that involves a 10 kilowatt inboard motor that's going on a 29-foot sailing yacht, replacing the diesel engine on that one. And so results to follow, but the calculations suggest that we should certainly be able to achieve quite a realistic cruising range of something like 50 miles on one charge at the typical hull speeds of that boat. That's actually a Sadler 29, that will be the first one that we'll be doing that on. And the reason that we've got into that now is because only now have the batteries been available to make that economically viable. ePropulsion have brought out their new E-series range of batteries, and it works out at about 40 pence per watt hour, which is, and that ain't bad, and that's something like half the sort of traditional price that people are expecting to pay for that sort of technology. So that then means that the combination of motor, battery, etc., is not a million miles away from the cost of replacing what may be beyond its economical life diesel engine with another diesel engine. So now that is a viable cost alternative as much as anything else. So we're excited about that. Other things that we're working on, of course, it's always been an interesting thing when people are buying electric motors, we took the decision in January 2019 to actually stop selling combustion motors completely, for various reasons, but primarily to allow us to focus on developing the applications for electric motors. And what we found is a lot of people don't necessarily understand. The first question they'll ask you is, what's the horsepower equivalent of this when they're comparing it to a combustion motor? And well, there isn't really a direct comparison that makes any logical sense depending on how you're using the boat. So there's obviously an education requirement there. And then of course the other problem is that certainly for a lot of applications, as we know, it's not yet entirely feasible for electric to be the answer for everything. And a lot of that's down to weights, i.e. so smaller vessels, we do a range of boats from 2.75 meters to 4.3 meters, and even the smallest boat, if you had a combustion motor on there, that could be up to 15 horsepower. Now, a 15 horsepower combustion outboard on a 2.75 meter rib that weighs 36 kilograms will go quite rapidly. And in order to achieve that in an electric world, well, it's not really viable, but just down to the amount of batteries you'd require as much as anything else. So that needs working on, but we're certainly working on that right now. In that we're currently developing a rigid inflatable, a folding rigid inflatable boat with an aluminium hull. This will have an inboard electric motor that will allow this boat to achieve speeds of circa 25 knots, and at sort of cruising speeds of 20 knots, achieve a range of circa 50 miles. So this is now starting to get to be something that's going to open a lot of opportunities. A lot of other people looking for this sort of size of boat, and I note with interest the requirement from the from World Sailing for something remarkably similar to exactly what we're developing right now. So there's that, what else have I got to tell you? Really, there's a range of opportunities. There's a range of options, and over and above the existing products that we have, we are also working with several boat builders to develop solutions specific to their requirements, which we're excited about and very happy to do. So today, I was happy to take part in this to allow people to know that we're here, and we're very interested in talking about that. So that's it from me, really.
That's great. Thanks, Steve. That's really interesting and good to hear where you're heading. So I think what we'll do is we haven't got any questions coming up yet, and I think we'll go through the series of presentations from the different manufacturers, and then we'll take some questions at the end, because as I say, I think there'll be some of the questions will be answered as we go through the other presenters. So I'd like to hand over to Alex then from RS to talk about the Pulse 58 project.
Okay, can you all just hear me? I guess you can.
Yes.
Great. Okay. My name is Alex Devon. I'm the CEO of RS Sailing Design and Technologies. As an RS brand, we're one of the biggest small boat manufacturers just in the world. We make just under 3,000 sailboats a year. We wanted to differentiate a little bit of what, and something which we got into with the help of propulsion was electric in our RS21, which we launched, which was a 21-foot cable boat, which has a retractable electric drive. And their help and support has been fantastic. But that's where we first got into electric power. We suddenly realized, I guess at the same time as Dan, bringing together the opportunity for the challenge, was there did seem to be a potential opportunity with electricity, with electric power boats in general. Our experience with this sort of thing was that replacing electric power into existing boats might not be the answer because of weight. So we kind of had a new bit of paper really, and we kind of started again, because I think, as what David was saying earlier on, electric power, trying to push a boat in water is actually pretty damn hard with electric power. So you've got to chase all your efficiencies around everything. And I think to make a small boat, and I think that's one of the biggest kind of issues that people don't realize, is the smaller the boat, actually the harder it is to make it efficient. Because in reality, you, for example, on the Pulse, we've got 360 kilos of batteries alone that we need to put into a 6-meter rib. So suddenly it's against you. Suddenly you've got displacement issues. So you've got to look at it in a different way. So we started the Pulse project about 3 years ago. We've made 3 or 4 kind of prototype hulls. We launched the Pulse at the Dusseldorf show this year, and will be in production in March of next year. We're just about to launch the pre-production boat now. But over the whole concept of the boat, we've been, as I said, we've been trying to chase efficiency. So understanding with the hull form, understanding what's super efficient there, understanding the rates of the boat, making sure we can make it as light as we can, and very importantly, trying to find a drive which, for the speeds we want to be getting done, and our speeds are focusing between 0 and 25 knots. Anything over that, we feel that we would need to look into like hydrofoils and things like that to make something which can do a range which we feel the market would want. And I think for part of that is trying to understand the market. And I think something that we've been trying to do over the last few years is to try to understand what people need. And there's no question, as we've all kind of talked about, there is this this situation at the moment that people are just nervous of electric power, and that I potentially can't do the 30 knots of what we're trying to do. So somehow it's as much important now regarding how we go ahead with electric kind of power is to communicate with everybody how it could work for them. And I think it is fair to say that the journey that we've been on is not one particular, I think it is fair to say that electric power might not be suitable for everything, but for a lot of things, there is no question that it is most certainly a way that it can work. One of the things that we've done is over the last just 18 months, is we've handed a whole heap of data responders onto sailing school boats, institution boats, and to try and get an understanding of how much they use their power boats. So what that will tell us is that it will tell us, very much like what Dan has done for the Olympic thing, but actually what it does, obviously that's very focused to their needs. And what we've done is done it in a way so we can see kind of how long they've been out in the boat for, how quickly that they go, and things like that. And actually, it's hugely surprising when you come back in to show them the kind of information, is actually the kind of 85% of the time is only at kind of 10 knots. So suddenly you can then begin to communicate with these people, saying that the electric idea could work for you. So that is something which I think we need to do a better job at, is communicating what electric could do for you. And certainly from my point of view, I'm more than happy to share that information with the RYA and basically just other institutions, just to create a create a way of information that we can share. I also think that part of this is not just electric powered, but it's of course how we make the boats too, because from our point of view, I feel we've got a pretty large obligation now to make our manufacturing in our boats are as sustainable as we possibly can. And from that point of view, we've joined something called Marine Shift 360, which is a life cycle and like analysis program, so we can really understand what our carbon footprint is when we are going to manufacturing our new pulse, and we can experiment with different materials within that to understand what our carbon footprint is. So one of the things that we're really keen to kind of do is for the pulse to be a complete carbon neutral product. So whatever we still have within a carbon footprint, we'd like to offset that in. We also have another kind of a partner called Create, which we're helping to offset the carbon footprint which we still have against that. Now, what we would love to find is to find something like a partner in the marine environment where we can help to offset that, rather than trees or and other things. The only issue with that at the moment is there's obviously a whole heap of scientific kind of paperwork which potentially tells us that it can, by offsetting it in trees, it's something which works. At the moment, we don't have that information available to us on sea grasses and other things. But from our point of view, if we could, then that's what we would love to go and do. So it's not just from a pulse point of view, it's not just the sustainability of being electric. It's also very much part of the situation of being manufacturing as well, which is important to us. So as I said, we have our production starts in March, and the interest of the pulse is at the moment quite phenomenal. So from that point of view, we are just hugely excited. I'll put on the chat the website, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions afterwards. I would also like to quickly say thanks to Ross as well. Part of his help and support through the British Marine has to involve different industries to help us support the electrifying of our boats, from the motor trade, and that has been hugely helpful for us, because there is no question the tech that we want does seem to be in a different league at the moment, from a production and security just shutdown point at the moment. So it's allowed us to develop things with more confidence by trying to use those partners. So I think that's pretty much it, actually, at the moment.
Great, thanks, Alex. That's really interesting. And yeah, so we're getting the kind of mix of completely new designed hulls and so on, with the kind of retrofit side of things that Steve covered, as well as the new boats that they're talking about as well. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? We've got to look at what we're doing for new build, but we also need to look at that kind of legacy as well, and what we need to do with the legacy fleet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to make a point of, sorry, it's so hot in here, it's so hot in here. I think it's really important to understand what people want, and making sure that, because there is no doubt that replacing electric kind of outboards with some boats will definitely work. There's no doubt about it. But I think as soon as you do want to get the performance out of things, then suddenly you might need to have a look at a fresh bit of paper of how to squeeze those efficiencies, because those things are going to make a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. No, thanks, Alex. That's really interesting. So have we got other Alex from Island Ribs on the line? Oh yeah, they're there, coming up as Blake Lucas. That's what's confusing me. So yeah, it'd be great to hand over to Alex then, and he can talk about what they're up to and the kind of questions they're asking of boat users in terms of their need and so on. So great. So hand over to Alex.
Can you hear us, guys?
Yeah.
We're a development company, essentially. Just so happens that we build boats, and within our company, we've been building boats for many, many years, designing and developing product in and around the confused and choppy waters of the Solent. We design our product in-house, we manufacture the tooling in-house, we test and we develop our product in-house, we sign off our product in-house, and then we take it to the marketplace from there. Our big focus in such a young company has been largely compliance. Understanding, we as boat builders feel that we understand boats quite well. We've used them for many, many years, Brian, in fact, for centuries, I think. But we've used our boats and other boats for a long time, and there's a lot of restrictions in boat building. There are challenges in boat building, and I think we've got our finger on those. The challenge, one of the other challenges, is to be compliant, and starting young with a new business, that's a great opportunity. So looking at our compliance to ISO, MCA, RCD is very relevant, and it has a hidden advantage in that when you look at other people's applications, you can quickly assess whether your vessel fits to their requirement, because they've already got a standard to which they perform. So from there, we have to have a good hull. We have to have the right characteristics in the way that the boat performs at sea. It has to have good sea keeping capabilities. It has to keep you dry. It has to be able to carry sufficient weight. Our developed hull at 6.5 meters has an on-deck capacity, excluding a crew of 2 and a full tank of fuel, of 789 kilograms. We can tell you precisely that under load, at what speed, what horsepower or kilowatt output will be needed, and what the resistance of the hull is. So refinement of that process of how the hull operates is quite a straightforward process. The data is available. We process that data routinely, and we can stand on the boat and feel the trim angle, we can measure the trim angle, and then we can feed the trim angles and the weight distributions back into the algorithm to produce the interesting factors, the interesting data that helps us. We can make those alterations quite easily because we've practiced and developed that through a range of product sizes from 6.5 now through to 10. And it's interesting to look at the efficiencies of the different hull sizes. But what we don't really know an awful lot about is propulsion systems. We know that batteries and brushless motors produce large torque from a low speed, just like a hydraulic motor would. We know lots about some of these aspects, and we understand amp hours versus amps, power versus energy. We can go round and round. But there are challenges that those differences in propulsion systems create. How you engage with the water is one of those challenges. We are, after 20 plus years of developing boats, well, and randomly other things as well, from diggers to who knows what we definitely know is there's no quick route for development. Prototyping is essential. From prototyping, you need to put your prototypes into the right places, not charging people to have them. You need to put your aeroplane in with the right users. You need to leave it with them. You then need to gather their opinions. You take their opinions to one side and you sit down and you work out those opinions into a manner that they become facts, so that then you can go and argue about those facts, because opinions can't be wrong. So until you convert your opinion to fact and get that back into the process, you can't really get to the end of your development process, is what we've learned over the years of being development engineers. So moving on to electric boats. No, I think we stick with our hull just for a moment. I think a good time for Blake here to show you a little bit of work that we've been doing on our hulls, aside from electric motors and propulsion systems. And I think I'm going to hand over for Blake to do the talking, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Less awfully.
I'm going to share the screen quickly. I've just put together a video. It's about a minute long, and it's just going to give you an overview of our hull. We don't run a hull through resistance calculation programs before we necessarily decide to make it and then say those are the figures. The hulls are proven and tested, and then the programs are manipulated to reproduce the hull. All the data that we collect is based on data from around the Solent, from up and down the south of England. There's other various locations as well where our boats are placed. So I'm going to play a short video to start with, and I'm just going to talk through it. Can everybody see the screen? Can someone just tell me if they can see the screen, it's visible, or a thumbs up?
The one with the donkey and the two goats.
Okay, grand, thank you. Okay, so I'll just start off. This is coming into Hamble over here on the Isle of Wight. This is a twin engine, 7.5 metre vessel. The boat is travelling at approximately 35 knots at the moment, slowing down to sort of 20 knots by the end of the clip. If you notice the forefoot and the trim of the vessel, we are a running trim. The bow is nice and high. And it's slowing down to, in terms of the brief that we were given, especially from World Sailing, the difference in our resistance from, for example, 12 knots, 14 knots to 24 to 26 knots is really negligible. So we're talking about having constant use throughout the day. At 14 knots, really, you can be running at 24 knots and you're not going to see the difference in resistance in kilonewtons.
Or in kilowatt consumption.
In kilowatt consumption as well. I do have a kilowatt graph later to explain a bit more about our horsepower requirements. So moving on from this, I have a video next of another 7.5 metre in a head sea. This is where resistance, this is the slowing down. So this is coming off the plane, sorry, of the 7.5 metre. The boat is still moving at a reasonable speed. The boat is still effectively coming off the plane. More interesting is running in a head sea. The water's not always flat as we like it. It's important to maintain good trim, boat trim, as well as engine trim. through the water, as seen here in the 6 meter series. This is a 6.5 meter. The vessel has a 115 horsepower engine on it, running at approximately 30 knots. You notice the high bow, the way the boat displaces the waves. It's particularly important to focus on efficiency at high speed in all conditions. I'm just going to pause this here for a second. The vessel just seen in the video was running at approximately 28 to 30 knots in that head sea. That puts us in the region of using realistically 60 horsepower when you take into account the roughness. So all the prediction programs we can use will theoretically tell us that the boat in flat water is going to do this speed at this trim. What it doesn't tell you is how your specific hull is going to react to the external environment. The deep V, the shape of the bow, whether it's concave or convex, how high your forefoot is, how high your bow is. Windage, yeah, example, windage, tide, it does not account for this. So the data collection that we do takes into account, yes, what the program is telling us, but realistically what is happening in terms of resistance. Let me just move on a little bit more. Next video, I believe. Exporting. So as I say again, this is the 6 meter series. This is the 6.5 meter hull. So that's just to give you an overview of our vessels, our hull forms, effectively. I'll stop sharing the screen and hand back to Alex for a second.
Goodness me. So essentially, I think, as I was saying a little while ago, we understand our hulls and our hull form, and we have a very good customer base, and they seem to be quite happy. Propulsion systems are the challenge. We know that we have the capacity on our deep V hull to perform and carry weight. That's quite a simple fact. The question next is, where do we put our prototypes? Previous speakers were saying quite rightly that what we have to do is get these boats out into the field. It's the normal route of production development. You develop a product and then you develop it into a production process. So we're not rushing to get into the production process. A lot of other people would like that to happen, I'm sure, but the reality is we need to develop a prototype. These prototypes need to go into working environments. So we need to be looking at who is using these boats and to what standard they're operating. The simple fact is that electric cars was not a one-step development. And I don't believe that electric boats will be either. But to make it move forwards, I think that what we, without sort of giving away too much, but I think that the right route to start is to get a hull form that is proven and tested, that codes commercially up into a working position with a prototype propulsion, system on board. And the second stage of development from there is to look at the modular process and how you would fit that. And obviously from there, changing materials, etc. But those are quite straightforward calculations, weight saving versus strength gain.
We could do theoretical mathematical calculations all day long. Maths is not wrong.
Just the data that you put in.
Exactly. If you put in junk, you get junk out. So there's only one way to know really, and that's physical testing, prototyping, development. Tesla, they didn't click their fingers and suddenly they had a Tesla Roadster 3. They developed their products from a very early stage. They built very few cars actually. They even gave them to their staff to test.
Just like a Hellman Minx, but you wouldn't know that.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
So yeah, it's down to the commercial users to be able to use them and get a grasp of them, and then it becomes the feedback, and that's where the development comes from. It doesn't come from the computer screen necessarily.
Great.
I guess therefore we're looking for the people to put the prototype into when we get there. That's where we're at. We've got some good ideas. Hopefully there's lots of people that want to share in the process, or vice versa. I think it's been a very interesting forum to listen into. Thank you for your time.
Great, thanks, Alex, and thanks, Blake. I mean, I think it's really important that thing of using an evidence-based approach essentially is what you're doing. You've got to build up that evidence base, both on the design side but also on the usage side, and that's something that hopefully the RWA will be able to help with in terms of going out to all our members and seeing and the clubs and seeing what their need is, and we'll probably cover that a bit in the discussion when we get to the end of this, actually, because I think there are some clubs on the line that will kind of call in.
I think the people that will be able to buy into this in the early stages are going to be commercial.
Yeah,
I think that's why we've got to look at the commercial process, because these technologies that will then be able to spread outwards into all those other recreational or semi-recreational markets that exist. You can't, home engineers do some amazing stuff, don't they? It's just remarkable, but you need the commercial input to get it to move in the right direction. And that's why I think our starting point is to now be looking at a few of the users and what their standards are.
There's so many load, velocity, time on the water variables to take into consideration to reach across the broad spectrum of commercial users or pleasure users, perhaps. So effectively, you can't pinpoint one thing. I'm not saying we are pinpointing one thing at all, but if you pinpoint, for example, sailing and coaching, is that really applicable for harbour authorities, police, etc.? So it's such a broad spectrum that
as there are a broad spectrum of boats.
Exactly.
A canal barge is quite different to a kayak, is quite different to a high-speed hub.
Absolutely, there's a lot of opportunity out there in all those fields. Really, I think it's quite exciting. My background is in engineering originally, and I find all this exciting and interesting. It's a good time to be looking at these things.
It makes it worth coming to work in the morning to build boats. Actually, new idea. That's what inverted commas floats our boat. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you both. And we'll hand over now to Jamie, who's Marine Electrification Solutions, who's going to take us through his experience and knowledge, not just covering electric boats, but other energy sources as well, I think. So are you there, Jamie? Are you ready to roll?
Yeah, Phil, I'm here, and yeah, very much enjoyed watching and listening so far.
Great.
And I'm ready to share my screen.
Great. Carry on.
Hopefully you can all see that. Yeah, so just to firstly hello, and to quite a number of you, you know me, and I'm very pleased that I know you. But for those of you who don't, I'm Jamie Marley, and I work as an independent consultant, specifically only working with electric and hybrid propulsion systems now. I've been around the industry, and I've worked as a marine electrician for many of the boat builders, and have been very fortunate to work for one of the bigger electric propulsion business companies in the world, and that took me away from these shores to other parts of the world, but I was able to come back, and when I came back, I was met with a pang of frustration that the UK hadn't progressed as much as what I had seen in Europe. But I quickly reminded myself actually that this is a time of opportunity for us, and the time is very much now where the electrification and us, the emphasis to decarbonize or get to zero emission for our vessels in the UK is a big challenge, but actually it's a very exciting time, and there's no day that I wake up and don't feel the excitement of the industry the British marine industry that I work in. And so I'm just going to run you through a little bit of some slides that I've put together that sort of helps me to focus, and hopefully it'll sort of give some thought of some of the challenges that where we've come from, some of the challenges where we're going, but also perhaps give an indication that there is a lot else that we can learn from and we can gain from going on in other parts of the world that we haven't yet embraced here in the UK. See if I can. Yeah, so when I look into my industry, I'm very fortunate. I've got a crystal ball. We can look into the automotive industry and see what's going on, as we always have done as a marine industry, and know that parts of that will trickle down into our industry, and perhaps no better a time to see where the automotive industry is benefiting us than what is happening with them, and with electric and hybrid cars. And we're starting to see some of that that technology finding its way into our world for the benefit. I also, as somebody that is enthusiastic about electric boating and the electrification industry, I'm able to look back over to Europe and to the rest of the world and see, in many cases, some countries that have advanced a lot further and have had electric propulsion and boats that are electrically propelled within their lakes and on their waters for many years. So there is a lot to be learned from that, and as well as some of the businesses and technology that is well established there can be embraced and brought over to the UK. So certainly, I mean, lots of people wonder why now is the time for electric boating. I think electric boats would always work, but it's the battery technology naturally that has influenced this change, as well as this renewed acceptance that we do have a climate emergency and we have to do something. But also to reap the benefits that electric boating and these kind of boats give us. Actually being on an electric boat is a very nice experience, and I would imagine that there's some people that really love the sound of engines, as do I do, but actually electric boating is certainly something that is enjoyable. So what we are seeing is there's a change of mentality, a change of attitude around the globe, away from the horsepower, and really it seems we're getting very smart, and efficiencies, as we've talked about today, efficient hulls and getting clever with how we move vessels through the water, coupled with electric and hybrid, is a great winning combination that I've seen in many of the projects that I've been involved in. The newly designed vessels that always were meant to be electric or hybrid have been designed around that application and have been very successful as a result. So what is available today for the boats that we're talking about today, and what drive solutions is available? It's worth me pointing out that many of these brands and manufacturers are not well or are at all represented in the UK at the moment. And so there lies a very good opportunity, which I in some cases have managed to help that bring that product over to the UK and bring them together with the right partner. So certainly there is a reasonable offering, and I think by the nature of how not only this in the UK but in other countries, I think I could probably be honest to say that there's new propulsion systems and manufacturers coming up probably like almost monthly in some respects. Certainly for those of you that know Mets and attend Mets, it is a very no surprise in a way, but still very surprising what you find there. Around every corner now there seems to be a new propulsion system of some kind, hybrid or electric. You can see that there's many manufacturers making parallel systems, many manufacturers making serial hybrid propulsion systems, but again, not all of them are here in the UK or represented here in the UK. And I think that probably is an important point, that what we have as a marine industry is we have many businesses now that are very, very interested in this and want to get involved and want to understand what the solutions are. And I've sort of in my small capacity as one person, I feel that demand increasing. And the questions are, that are increasing in what is the system to install in our new design, or what does our new design vessel need to look like, and who should I speak to? Well, there is a challenge that that these companies are still small. They are located in other parts of the world, and communications and so on adds to that challenge. So I really welcome and believe that encouraging these or people to take these dealerships up and work with these businesses will help us along and fast track this technology to be embraced within our country. So what can we achieve? There's a snapshot of a number of vessels that are in most cases are on the water. They are all electric or hybrid, and you can see a number of them are foiling, but it's all possible, and it's all, in this case, nearly all 100% electric. I think besides the catamaran down the bottom left, that's hybrid. So what do we have here in the UK? There's probably a few of you aware of Gloriana. There's Hugo Boss in the middle there. There is hybrid vessels on the Norfolk Broads. There's naturally full electric and hybrid vessels on the inland waterways. Arxon, being produced over in the Isle of Wight, will be hybrid vessels as full or hybrid only, as far as I understand. But we are producing electric boats, but not at this point, as we're aware, in high numbers to hit headlines. So my conclusion, embracing electric and hybrid future-proofs businesses, organisations, and clubs, and investing now very much helps us to get a firm grip on the ladder of the future for sustainability, and really incorporating motors is actually not a hard thing in most vessels, but it's the batteries that are the challenge, and more importantly the form factor of these batteries, which is probably one of the single most biggest challenges that I've had in the past 6 years, is actually getting batteries, the right amount of capacity into the vessel that with the shape and size and weight that is allowed to achieve the requirements. But probably my last thing that I very much think as not necessarily as a warning, but as a thought, our wonderful marine industry that we have at, that we all love in working within, does have I believe it has a threat from this, and it is in the sense of regulations catching up regulations of emissions catching us up and biting us, where the possibility that boats are restricted from being used because they are still have old technology in them and are creating emissions. And I would very much hope that we never get into that situation where restrictions are imposed and this new technology hasn't been embraced well enough to provide solutions for it for as many of the people and vessels that can be. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to some questions when we go for that.
That's great. Thanks, Jamie. That's really interesting run through everything that's out there really at the moment. I mean, on your last point about regulations catching up with this, I mean that's something that is certainly coming more to the fore as individual cities in particular start declaring diesel-free centres to them and so on. If you think about Bristol and London in particular, you know, how are we going to respond to that? I think the boating side of it is probably being ignored at the moment, but there's a danger that we get caught out, as you say, and caught up in that, maybe in an unintended way, in some of that regulation that happens, and that's something that the RWA spends quite a bit of time on, actually looking at that regulatory side of it. The team I work with in the wider team does a lot of government lobbying and keeping an eye on all those bits of legislation as they come through, and as does Ross's team at British Marine as well. And we often work together on these things to make sure we don't get any surprises. It's not always possible to avoid the surprises, but we do our best to do that. So I thought that was interesting. Some of the designs there look quite like kind of tomorrow's world 1970s. I thought some of the boat designs you were showing. It's quite exciting to see some of those things coming to fruition, really.
Yeah, Phil. I mean, obviously the snapshots slide is there to impress. So obviously not all electric boats look that impressive, I would say, but certainly, yeah, that it was meant to show what is possible.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of kind of more technical questions have come through. So there's one from Nigel saying, does the extra torque of e-powered vessels give them any surprising edge? So we could ask Jamie first, and then the other people who presented as well.
Yeah, I think in my experience with systems that I've been involved in, obviously we still have an interface that is the propeller into water, and so there's slip. So obviously we can with an electric motor we can spin that propeller or impeller as fast as we want, and we have all that torque from very low the 0 RPM. But we still need to find a line that we don't cavitate. So so the torque is there is good, and what we can find is that we can swing propellers that have higher number of blades, which equals more grip, which gives the acceleration, but then perhaps doesn't give the top end. So so yeah, torque is often a focal point for people that really love the idea that you can accelerate much faster.
So Steve and Alex, do you have anything to add on that one? If you unmute if you're.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. Yes, torque is one of those things that people ask the question about quite a lot, but the major advantage of the electric motor is efficiency across the range and at different speeds. So again, it's down to the education thing, where people have got assumptions about what it is they have to achieve or what numbers it is they're expecting to hear. We're in a whole new world with electric propulsion. Short answer.
Okay. Alex, want to add anything to that at all, or Blake?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think. Oh, sorry, wrong Alex.
That's right. You can go first.
Oh, it's probably going to be exactly the same as yours. Probably not, to be honest. I think those points are well constructed, really. So not much more on that. Just to add from me.
Yeah, from our perspective, it's the distribution of getting the torque produced by the electric engine into the water. There's so many programs now where ECUs are programmed to make electric engines behave like a combustion engine. High speed, high torque. For example, we use Suzuki's on our boats. We're a Suzuki dealership and distributor. At 30 knots in a head sea, we do 1 litre per nautical mile, sometimes 0.9 litres per nautical mile. In terms of outboard efficiency, that's quite efficient. But until we put an electric outboard on a boat and give it the beans for a while, we don't know where our hull stands in terms of electrical propulsion. And we're more interested in how we're going to get the torque through the water more than anything. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then there's a question from Graham about where are we in relation to fuel cells for outboards. I'm looking forward to the time when a small fuel cell cassette can be slotted into my outboard. So any thoughts on that? So Ross has got his hand up. So.
I might take a little bit of that. So for ISO, Small Craft Committees, as the global committee, I've been assigned with fuel cells to really advise the committee on when fuel cells get to the point of use and development where we need to look at standardization. But for me, I suppose at the moment, fuel cells are very rarely used, and in effect, they are electrical generators. So they are just another way of creating energy. Creating energy rather than storing energy and transferring to some sort of motor. So I'm not sure if we'll ever get to a fuel cell slot, but we're certainly looking at the moment at fuel cells being installed on vessels as alternative energy production instead of things such as generators and so on.
Okay, that's great. And there's a couple more questions on the technical side. So Nigel's asking about local harbour authorities being very keen on the idea of e-harbour launches as water taxis, but their issue is the ability to fast charge between trips. I think we covered that a little bit before, but I guess it's looking at the kind of Tesla supercharger model, I guess, and getting that amount of power down to what are probably quite remote locations in some cases. I guess, Jamie, would that be the issue there, really?
Sorry, Phil. I was reading a couple of questions at the time.
Sorry, it's the kind of fast charging bit between trips for harbour launches and so on. I guess that is looking at the kind of Tesla supercharger model and whether you've actually got that capacity to repeatedly use that in sometimes remote locations. I think
we're obviously we've seen glimmers of that as previously mentioned, but I think that I really get the feeling that that's some way off at this point. Obviously we can the feasibility of being able to fast charge from DC to DC is something that's available for we see for automotive at this stage, but seeing it in the marine environment, we're a long way off, and I still feel I hear the reaction of the chicken and the egg. What's going to come first? You need a demand. Lots of people were saying we need a demand and to put this kind of infrastructure and solutions in. I think when you actually look on bigger systems like some of the ferries in Norway, the package of supplying the ferry, the full electric ferry, and the charging facility at both ends perhaps comes as seems to come as a package. So for the smaller recreational side, I think we're probably really lucky that a lot of our marinas do have a 16 amp shore supply connection, which in lots of cases can give a full recharge overnight, and certainly from a lot of the applications and projects that I've been in, that has been enough. But as soon as we demand more, we need that charging facility.
Yes, I guess the point there at the moment is that most of those marinas will be relying on diversity of use of those systems, won't they? So actually they won't be expecting all the boats to turn up and use a full 16 amps overnight. So they probably will need to look at that side of it. So there's a question from Alex Watley here, actually saying to the developer side, really saying, electric motors are efficient. Standard fixed pitch propellers are not an ideal match. Has anyone done any work in that area of having variable pitch propellers? So that's for Steve and Alex and Blake, I suppose.
Nothing hugely significant has been developed in propeller world, primarily because most of the applications we've been working in have been slower speed applications, and certainly with the experiments that we have done, it's had very little effect on the outcome. So
okay,
it's more about reprogramming.
Yeah.
the motor controller to make that efficient at whatever speed the vessel is doing.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, as the technical department is saying here, that is it's more about programming the motor to use the propeller on there efficiently, as opposed to
which is what Blake was saying, isn't it, as well? I think in terms of the ECU side of it, basically. Yeah. Okay.
Just very quickly, I'd be interesting to hear from Alex on his the propeller installed on the RS, because they've gone for a completely different design. It'd be interesting to hear the basis behind that and the reasoning behind it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ross. We partnered with a company called Rad Propulsion. We were very keen and very aware that, as I said beforehand, that we need to be chasing all the efficiencies we can. We perceive that quite a lot of the efficiencies that we can gain are, as everyone has talked about, through the motor and motor controller, but also the propeller. I think in the speeds that we're trying to achieve, and I think this is where it's very important, as from our point of view, and we've done quite a lot of work with other partners to validate this, but from our point of view, we feel that for the speeds that we want, we've gone for a rim drive motor and propeller for two reasons. One, we wanted to aid safety if we could, if we were going to go to go and do something. And then the other thing is to try and gain the efficiency of the propeller, but to use the hub as the main drive from that point of view. And effectively what that does is, it's difficult to show you. I don't know if I've got anything here, but it's effectively, we don't have a central spigot where the propeller will go around. It's actually rotating around the hub, and what that does is a few things. It's it helps to reduce some tip losses, how the propeller is housed, and also it helps increase our torque by where the maximum part of the propeller is on the outside instead of around the center. So, as I said, for the speeds that we want to get done, we feel this is a very efficient drive. If you were going over 35 knots, then I would probably say that we would want to look into just more of a standard sort of propeller. But for the speeds that we want, that was our main drive. And one of the interesting things about it is it also, because of the design that's very kind of low pressure right in the middle of the hub, so any bits of weed or kind of rope just go straight through then the whole thing, so you kind of don't get all tangled up with kind of with bits of rope as well. So so yeah, that's why we picked that. I mean, I think there's more information on that actually if you kind of do kind of if you go to our site, it's all there with all of that, just a little bit more information.
Right, thank you. So I was just wondering whether Dan would be able to come back in a bit on from a world sailing perspective, because you've kind of seen all these different discussions going on, and how much of this is being addressed through your Challenge 2024 initiative. I don't know if you're still there, Dan.
Yeah, hi Phil. So in terms of what the specifics on props and things like that, or
yeah, I was just thinking about where because you've obviously got some people interested and some people helping to develop this. Is it a kind of limited number of developers who are working on the project, and what kind of have you just set them the parameters and then they're going away and thinking about all the technical issues themselves and coming back with a full solution, or are you kind of engaged with the whole technology development as well?
I think it's a mixture of the two, because we haven't specified set manufacturers. It's more of a challenge to the wider industry. And I'm very much a believer that actually, as we've heard from some of the presentations, that there's going to be slightly different boats which will be used for different applications across the sport. So we'd like to definitely encourage that as much as possible. And I think we have an opportunity similar to the RWA to certainly educate users about the benefits of electric boating, to get people to perhaps move away from the perception of the kind of floating milk float, and to show that they're capable of high speed and long distances and things like that. So that's something that is very much on our agenda over the coming years, and I think things like the Olympics, the delay is pretty challenging for a lot of people, but I think actually in terms of having an electric boat there, Tokyo next year, that would be something which would be a great opportunity to highlight it to lots of sailing fans.
Great. Thanks Dan. Just looking through the questions. So Didier was asking about new battery technologies such as metal air batteries. Is that something maybe Jamie has a view on, whether those are going to have provide a solution to power density and so on, whether you think battery technology is going to keep advancing at the same rate?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, the way I see it is obviously many different types of lithium batteries, and actually what I quickly realized in my position was to keep in touch with all of them and the advancement. You see a lot of it on social media, and when you're walking around the trade shows, you see different technologies being marketed. But I think for me, it's the important part is the battery that's actually in production, and that I can specify into an application or into a vessel. So it is sort of all very well having these big claims about what's coming. There are lots of, it's clear that there's lots of races going on, and they're going to maximize on certain lithium battery chemistries, and then the next thing's going to take over. So I think we're in safe hands in a way that always the next best thing and most feasible thing is or cost efficient thing, or the highest performance is always going to take the lead. It's just really for us as a marine industry, we need something that's going to come down and be put into a form that can go into our application, into a salt water, with perhaps high humidity. We all know boats. We know what they're going to have to go through, and then they need to tick all the boxes for regulation. So I think it's very exciting seeing what's coming, but it's actually really hard to keep your finger on the pulse with what you think is coming next. For me, it's seeing what's really available, and what we can use today, and what I can advise my clients and what they can install. So sorry, I can't talk exactly about lithium air because I don't know huge amounts. I'm aware of it coming, but I don't know when it's going to be ready, and certainly when it's going to come into the marine industry.
Thanks. And Steve, presumably the same goes for you, really. You're looking to see what's available on the market really all the time, rather than trying to second guess the technologies as they come along.
I mean, certainly from our point of view, we've kept that really open because things are going to evolve, and as it evolves, it'll either come down in price or the capacity is going to be going up. But I think in reality, at the same time, when we've looked into depth with different battery suppliers, and there are actually quite a few out there now doing all sorts of things, but very few have spent the time in legislation. And for us, that's really important, because 75% of what we do just is basically export, and that's where we see this also going to go. So having batteries which we can deliver and things like that are really quite important, and they only seem to be through a battery supplier. Things will change, and in some ways it's one of the strong reasons why as a package we didn't necessarily go down one supplier for everything. It just means as things do evolve, we can just be just to make sure we have what we think is the best.
Great. Steve, did you have anything to add on that? Oh, you're on mute.
So yes, no, not really is the short answer on that one. Again, I mean, lithium is obviously the dominant technology currently, but then there are untold variants of lithium chemistries available that all offer slightly different advantages and disadvantages. So no is the short answer. There's so many fantastic ideas out there, but yes, they're all just ideas, whereas we're dealing in the here and now.
Yes, you're delivering things to customers, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Phil, I'd like just, the whole thing about regulation versus innovation is really there. And, with any new technology, we've got to be sure of safety of the user, safety of the consumer, along with durability, and even moving to lithium ion batteries, the work that's going on behind the scenes to make sure that the standards and the safety levels are upheld, are upkept to ensure that the end consumers, they enjoy their product, and there's no consequences, of changing to new technologies. And things unfortunately do take time. It takes time to sit a group in a room and agree what the safe levels are for different technologies. So as technology moves quicker, it takes a while for regulation to catch up to enable that technology to be used, by the end user.
So I was just wondering if we could cover a little bit. There's quite a few points I think that were raised on the chat, and also in some of the talks about the kind of communication and education for boaters, and in turn the kind of information we need from boaters about their usage patterns and things. And I think there are a couple of people on the line who are from clubs. I see. I hope you don't mind me picking on you, but there's Ian Swan who's there from Hailing Island, I think. And I just wonder, Ian, whether you'd like to talk about the usage patterns that you have at your club, because you have quite a range of different needs, don't you? That sometimes high speed, sometimes not, and sometimes in difficult water conditions, and sometimes not. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what your needs are at all? Just wondering if Ian's there. There's a picture of him. No? I don't think he's going to be able to come on and join us at the moment. But it's just thinking about those different. Oh, there you are. He's there. Great. Hi. I just thought it might be interesting to hear from a club or two. And sorry to pick on you there, but I recognised your name from our conversations before. So.
Thank you. Well, I think Alex is pretty cognizant of how we operate at HISC and the diversity of different types of racing that we support and activities we support. So we have a fleet of about 12 ribs, all petrol powered, and they cover everything from cadet racing inside the harbour, club racing inside the harbour, what we call sprint racing, which is a kind of open meeting format out in the bay, of course, open meetings themselves, and then everything up to world championships, where we may have 100 boats on the water or more. So we've got pretty much every flavour of dinghy racing support from the smallest youths in Optimists up to International 14 Worlds. And we've also got members with yachts on moorings, which are club owned and supported by the club, with a launch, which would be that is back and forth as launches do to take owners and crew to their boats. So I think that's a real opportunity to electrify that particular boat. The ribs, because of the nature and diversity of what we do, ideally they would be good for doing maybe a 3-hour pot around the harbour when they may not use any fuel at all. And as you've said, spend a lot of their time just chugging along at less than the harbour speed limit of 8 knots and using very little energy, be that petrochemical or electricity. Whereas when we're out in the bay, if the wind gets up, we get a wind over tide event on Hailing Bar and the main channel back into the club. We need some fairly capable, powerful boats that are able to deal with difficult sea conditions, and potentially at the other end of the spectrum, when we have a flat calm, we may end up towing 100 boats back against the spring ebb tide. So quite a diversity of needs. And when we discussed the Pulse 58 with the RS team, I think it was very clear that our inside the harbour club racing, cadet, junior racing, optimists, youth training is all adequately covered by the performance envelope that has been discussed for the Pulse. So we're very keen to get one and put it through its paces or anything similar.
So, I mean, it sounds like if we could get some studies, then you'd be an ideal club to look at, really, in terms of putting sensors on boats and seeing how you use them, because you've got that huge variety. Exactly,
and I think as we proposed to the RS team, we've got that diversity. We've got pretty much everything covered, and we'd be very happy to partner with RS when we get a boat available or any of the other offers on the market. Obviously,
sorry, carry on.
COVID has destroyed sailing club finances, as I'm sure you're very well aware. So a big part of our revenue stream is championships and hosting events. Another big part is catering and house. Both of those have pretty much stopped. So yeah, we've really shut down into a very monetarist phase, which is not going to help ambitious projects to buy very expensive hardware, which was a challenge even in the days before COVID. So the cost benefit model, I think, is a real challenge, and swinging the mindset away from petrol. And we've got 50 years of petrol expertise and a lot of staff in the club who can keep our ribs and diesel committee boats running for relatively little cost. So transitioning all that away from our existing fleet to a new technology without the skill base is a challenge.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I was thinking that we've been responding to a few inquiries recently from academics who are looking at putting sensors on yachts to measure not how the yacht performs, but looking at other aspects of the environment that they're interested in. So I've been replying to them and saying, yes, we'd be very interested in getting engaged with this. Could you also add on to it some monitoring of the engine and other use and distance traveled, so that we can get some useful data out of your academic study as well. So we'll keep pushing from that side to see whether we can get academics involved in this process and sit on and piggyback on some of their funding, maybe where they're looking at collecting data.
Well, again, I'm sure we'd be keen to put those on our existing fleet and give us all a data set that's going to be very useful.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, maybe it's something we could look at with industry. Then it may be looking at a funding bid for some research money. So normally you'd be looking at development money, but maybe that kind of basic, almost social science end of it about usage patterns and things is something we should look at as a group.
Yeah, from an industry position, Phil, you know, something that's really important to us is really looking at how boats are being used. You know, we cannot achieve this transformation, the decarbonisation, without having the knowledge base to show customers, you know, our customers, that the solutions that meet their requirements. But to do that, we need to know what to design. Yeah. And at the moment, you know, there's a major gap in the industry in regard to the knowledge of how our customers use the boats and what their possible technological solutions to each of those different types of uses are.
Mm-hmm. I think that is super. Yeah, I think that is really very important indeed, and that's kind of why we got these made. So we've got some of these. What that does, it gives us 21 days of information, which you just chuck into a boat. It tells you how fast it's been, the slamming loads, all sorts of things. And because I think trying to communicate that to our customers as well is going to be super important, because I think people do have a range of, like, anxiety. They do. I think in cars, people begin to believe it, and I think nowadays with boats, I think it's really interesting for people to understand how they really do use their boats. And once we've got that information, then it's to say this could work. And from my point of view, as I said beforehand, I'm more than happy to help to share that information, because I think it's really quite important for the whole of the industry.
Speaking on behalf of lots of colleagues who aren't here to tell me to shut up, from the University of Plymouth's point of view, really interested in that kind of data set acquisition. And I think it's, you know, I've spent the last 10-15 years kind of on the overlap between academia and industry in a whole variety of sectors. I come from a composite manufacturing background. I spent many years helping businesses to take on more technical material processing techniques in composites, in particular moving to vacuum infusion. And with one company, one of the biggest responses I got when they successfully introduced that process on a new vessel, the first time they'd been using anything other than hand-laid composite techniques in their factory, the conversation turned to whether they would do that on their more traditional range of cruising yachts. And the answer was no. Our customers see hand-built boats as a sign of quality, whereas I, as an engineer, see hand-laying as the most basic and low quality manufacturing method you can possibly use in composites. So understanding what the customer needs and what the customer wants, and persuading them that there's a large difference between the two and that there is a better product available than the one they insist on buying, I think is a perennial challenge. Whether the data set will convince people or not, I don't know. We've had a lot of conversation today around speed and average speeds and top speeds. The number of people in my time spent as a commercial skipper and instructor, the number of times I sort of suggested to people they really needed a displacement boat or a transitional or semi-displacement boat, but they insisted they wanted the one that did, you know, 35, 40 knots, and then spent most of their time pootling around at 10, using far more fuel than they would have done at the same speed in a more appropriate hull form, is something I'm not sure we can get around. And commercial businesses want to provide things that people will buy. And if one company suggests that they have a better technical solution, but it doesn't appeal to the heartstrings of the customer, that's a difficult one to square. But if there's anything we can do to get involved with that study and that data set, at the risk of volunteering academics who don't have the time to do it, I'd be really interested to be part of that conversation.
I've already written your name down, so yeah. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's the VHS Betamax argument all over again, isn't it? The better technology or the one that people buy.
Yes, quite.
Indeed. So there's been a few questions in the chat thinking about safety in terms of wildlife and pollution and that side of things with alternative fuel sources. And that's certainly something I've been thinking about with the yacht that I've got now. It's that, you know, there are other advantages to switching over to electric as well as carbon, which is you don't end up with lots of oil in your bilge and being pumped out into the sea when you clean your bilges and that kind of thing. But there's also a few questions here around approaching wildlife very, very quietly and then scaring it off. So I don't know, Nigel, did you want to come on and tell us a little bit about that conversation you've been having?
Yeah, certainly. There is something like the WISE scheme. I mean, responsible boat users can go on the scheme and they will be guided on how to approach wildlife sustainably. But there is this issue, and I mean, you sort of put it to the nth degree. Imagine sort of jet skis that everybody seems to hate. Make one of those electric, and they could truly sneak up on things and then frighten the living daylights out of it at the last moment. Now, of course, a lot of this would be down to education, but we already do that within our harbours to boat owners, and it's just frightening how many people would still go close to dolphins and everything. And that forgetfulness that, you know, there is a guidance that says that we should only stick around dolphins and things for about 20 minutes, but they forget that there's somebody else that will then do it for another 20 minutes. And before you know it, the poor dolphins have had someone hanging around them for the last 24 hours. Well, an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. So yes, there are extra responsibilities that may well come with electric boats, and of course also the ability of some of these maybe using quiet jet propulsion to sneak up into the real shallows of our estuaries and then disturbing the sediment, which is already locked up a huge amount of carbon.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? And I was just thinking that my Renault Zoe, when you're doing less than 18 miles an hour, it makes a noise to warn pedestrians. So maybe this is the way we need to go. It doesn't sneak along like a Tesla and surprise you when it's a foot behind you. It's not as big as a Tesla either, so it's not quite so scary. But you know, it's certainly something that needs thinking about. Otherwise, there will be, you know, objections coming from that quarter. But yes, in terms of the maintenance and the kind of pollution side of it, that's a big plus, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if Steve or somebody wants to come in on that.
Well, yeah, certainly that was why we took the decision in January of last year to no longer offer combustion alternatives, because you know, as a sailor and water user myself, you know, you can easily identify where the fuel stops are on the river. You just follow the rainbow towards it, you know, where it's all getting spilled. And yeah, I think I've just become conscious of the fact that, well, there's a very simple way to mitigate that, you know. So, and then when you look at smaller combustion motors in particular, you know, always, you just see it all the time when they're getting, you know, they've been stored on their side or whatever, so then they're getting lifted out and stuck on the back of the boat. There's invariably spillage, no matter how careful people are, you know. So, and the challenge has been coming up with a cost-effective alternative to convince people that they could move away from that. And certainly, you know, in small outboard world, we have now achieved that. You know, the conversation has changed from have you considered this as an alternative, to people saying, which is the correct motor for me, you know, which is brilliant, because we know that there's no logical reason really for, I can't think of many logical reasons why you would buy a 2.5, 4, 5, 6 horsepower combustion outboard now, when it actually the advantages of electric is, whilst you might pay a little bit more for it initially, you're not tied into any sort of warranty costs. You have no fuel to buy, no oil to buy, no lubricants to buy, no servicing requirements, no winterizing requirements. So actually only a few years of ownership, and it's saving you money. So, and that to me was the only argument that people really had for not going electric in that end of the market. and now we're moving on to say larger vessels, you know, with pod drive motors and things, where there's a lot of 30, 40-year-old fiberglass sailboats out there with 30, 40-year-old diesel engines that are long past their best, you know, and they need to be replaced. And again, it was, you know, okay, well, what do we replace it with? Probably another diesel engine. Well, now, again, I think we're at the point where there's an economic argument that actually you could replace that when it needs replacing with an electric motor. And again, there's none of the winterizing, there's none of the oil in the bilges getting pumped out. There's just, you know, all of that. So yes, from that perspective, I think we should be doing everything in our power to convince people that there are better alternatives than combustion motors now. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, because there is that lifetime cost thing to think about, isn't there, that people don't consider at the moment. They look at that high capital cost, and it's the same as any form of renewable technology. You pay for all of it up front, and then you get free energy, you know, effectively almost free energy from it for the rest of its life. And so, yeah, it's looking at that. Yeah, the total cost of ownership side of it is really critical. Yeah. Great. So I just think if there's any other questions. I mean, yeah, I mean, Graham's saying about you know, a route map to allow boaters with a minimal budget to transition over, you know, for the older boats, and I think that is going to be a challenge. I think that will be a challenge at the moment, and that's why, you know, with Ross and others, we'll be looking at this roadmap, and there'll be certain things that we can hit really easily and really quickly, and some things will be a bit more, seem really intractable at the moment, but as we get down that pathway, we'll find ways of doing it, I think. And as I said before, maybe there are some, you know, if the engine's still okay in a very old boat, and it's used minimally, then going over to a biofuel may be the best option there, because, you know, why would you invest all that embodied carbon in a completely new system if you're only using it very intermittently until it needs actually replacing? And I guess that's the point of the pathway, really, isn't it? Is to look at that over a period of time and say, yeah, in 20 years' time we'll have achieved all of this. We don't need to do all of it now.
I think, Phil, that's a really interesting point. It's something that we're certainly looking at. I've got it on my literally on my list of to-dos in front of me now. Is to look at this, how to compare. You know, the ability to turn around to a consumer and say, well, actually, this is more environmental than that. You know, what is the basis for that statement? You know, where is the foundation on which we can propose environmental benefits or environmental change? And I think what's coming to the fore now is that, you know, we've got companies such as Marine Shift 360, which I think is great that they're stepping into the market with their carbon cycle or life cycle analysis tool, and it's to work on a consistent approach from industry. You know, a platform which all of industry together can use as a, you know, this is more environmental or that is more environmental, because otherwise we'll find ourselves in a very complicated discussion with lots of people declaring that their products are much more environmental, and actually within the carbon life cycle of a product, you know, it may not be, you know, and the usage data also goes into that. You know, how often are these products used? You know, as I've spoken to you in the past, you know, asking someone to change out their 40-year-old engine when it's used 50 hours a year, you know, where is there a benefit to it, given the materials and the energy that goes into the production of these new products? You know, and I think we have to be honest. You know, we're going to have to work together as an industry and come up with a very honest foundation, you know, to base these sorts of discussion on, because without that, you know, there is going to be lots of conflict.
Yeah, so transparency is the key thing there, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah, and accepting that it's not going to be perfect. So Ian's got a point.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about speed, performance, range, and what we haven't really discussed is the impact of the user of marine propulsion units standing in a cloud of toxic diesel fumes. Because in a yacht where you're typically, you know, you may be trying to go downwind at relatively slow speeds, you're not leaving the pollution behind. And in committee boats as well, you know, quite often you end up having the engine ticking over to keep the battery topped up or something. And I think that's something that we need to recognise.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point. Yeah, the kind of human health aspects of it. And it's the noise as well. Noise and vibration you get continually as well when you're doing that, isn't it? I mean, I I lived on a narrowboat for 6 years, and you spend all day standing on top of a thumping diesel engine. It's actually not very good for you. You need more beer when you get to the pub, that's for sure, if you've been standing on top of a hot diesel engine in the middle of summer all day. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's David Kendall's just noted, lobbying government for incentives as there are for cars. There are tax incentives in Sweden for electric boats, and I think yes, that is something we need to push really. And I think we talked before a little bit about maybe scrappage schemes and so on. And it kind of tying in with Graham's follow-up point on that, where he says about waste vegetable oil. Actually, in Sweden and in Finland, they make biofuels from waste forestry products, and that's available at most of the marinas around the coast there. So yeah, it's something we should look at. Sorry, Ross, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, there's a consultation at the moment in regard to future taxation of fuels, which includes a question over should fuel taxation be changed to incentivise the use of alternative fuels. So I would certainly recommend that anyone who has interest should be responding to that government consultation and supporting maybe an alternative tax encouragement to lower impact fuels such as you mentioned, biofuels, or even the other fuel I mentioned, which was the much cleaner alternative, which is created out of natural gas into a diesel replacement. So yeah, please, definitely everyone who has interest engage on that, because that's how we get change. It's how change happens, is through these consultations.
Yeah.
The interesting part of biofuels is always conversations around global sustainability of agriculture. When you talk about non-food crops, you have the same problem in biocomposites about whether displacing land where you could grow food, which also obviously sequester carbon as well, to feed people. If you use that land to grow materials or fuel, there's always an issue. I've been working with a company down here in Cornwall who are developing a biofuel engine based on bioethanol. And one of the reasons they've chosen that is that as we move and change our diets, particularly to reduce sugar, there's a massive opportunity to look particularly at the sort of corn syrup and other elements of high sugar crops that can be used for turning into ethanol. And actually there is a huge global downturn having been used in other industries. The ethanol industry is in decline, so we have plants that can produce it. It has a ready-made distribution network as a reasonably high density liquid fuel. So a very, very interesting opportunity to kind of translate a lot of what is normal for many people as a liquid fuel being stuck into an engine. And it avoids a lot of the things we've talked about around materials and range issues of electric vessels. Although interestingly, range is as we've discussed, in the same way that people travel slower than they think they do most of the time, they also travel a lot shorter distances than they think. So range anxiety in a car is, most electric cars can do at least the kind of range that people do for 90% of their journey. So again, it's an education one, but yeah, the biofuels one, really interesting opportunities there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the land use, sorry, you're going to say the land use side of it is,
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the work, we're working with engine manufacturers at the moment as well, because what most people don't realise is your engines are only warranted when you use a certain type of fuel. So even if you wish to go to an alternative, it may affect your long-term warranty on your engine, which is another negative. So actually, we need to encourage engine manufacturers to in effect guarantee and warranty the engines they produce with multi different types of fuel to enable personal choice, the user to be able to choose if they wish to go to an alternative fuel source.
Good point. Yeah, I mean, the whole land use question around it is a complex one. I mean, I think we might end up saying you've got to eat less beef if you want to go further in your boat or something like that, and change the land use patterns. I recommend Apocalypse Cow on Channel 4 with George Monbiot if you want to have a look at land use in the UK. It's quite an interesting film about how much land we use for different things. Sue Scott's asking about acoustics from electric engines and wildlife species reactions. I mean, there's so I think those kind of noise patterns and so on, and also underwater noise. are things that we're looking at, again, through European Boating Association. There's a lot of regulation coming in on that in the Baltic countries through the HELCOM conference there, which is liable to start finding its way into other areas as well. So it's something we're keeping a close eye on. I think the difficulty at the moment is there's very little data available that shows the impacts of different frequencies of noise on wildlife. But it does seem to me that moving to alternative forms of energy, of propulsion, kind of addresses some of those issues as well. I guess you'll end up with more high frequency noise rather than the low frequency noise that you get from diesels, but it's something we need, the research needs to be done really, and that needs to happen over a period of time. Yeah, so I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions on there at the moment that we haven't covered. We've covered most people's points. Oh, one question I got actually, which is coming back to Dan again, and in response to the discussion about Marine Shift 360, is there's a few of these around, these life cycle analysis tools around at the moment, and I was just wondering whether Dan had a view as to whether World Sailing might start looking at a specific one of these so that we get consistency, because as Ross was saying, you need to have that consistency of approach, because there are so many assumptions behind these tools that you need to use the same one for everything. Otherwise everybody will come up with a solution that says their product is better.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, Marine Shift 360, the background behind that's 11th Hour Racing, so philanthropic funded. They've got an interest, and also they're building a new IMOCA, and as Alex mentions, RS and several other boat manufacturers have been involved in that project. We have specified that new boats for the Olympics in 2028 will have to have LCA carried out, but we haven't specified which one because of your points. But I think we're kind of leaning towards Marine Shift 360 as the kind of the one that's the marine industry can use. And they use data sets which can obviously be updated and adapted, and I think it's as good as the amount of input and data that they get from the current manufacturers. So actually, the more people that use it, the more accurate it will be.
Absolutely, yeah. I suppose, Ross, from your point of view, it's tricky, isn't it, going with one supplier if people are competing in the market for this? But ultimately, we need to try and get some kind of standard, don't we?
We do, and I'd certainly, I would love there to be a standard created, either a BS or an ISO standard, which creates in effect a level playing field for everyone to be able to use. So. The problem is these are commercial organizations in the majority, and they're creating products to sell. And so, yeah, I think it's something that industry, we need to really work on together to figure out the best way of achieving what we want to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great. Well, we're coming up to 3 o'clock, and I think we've covered most of the questions that have come through, and certainly the kind of core interests that people have had in those questions. So yeah, I'd say thank you to everybody for participating, and thank you for all your questions, and in particular thank you to the panel for being willing to come and talk about what they do and take all the questions that everyone's posed to them. So the session's been recorded, so at some point you'll get an email with a link to the recording, and I've certainly written down a whole host of things on my bit of paper here that's got more and more full as we've gone on. And I think there'll be a lot of follow-up with people. So yeah, thank you all very much for attending, and I've certainly found it fascinating and really informative. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.